I think we're live now, Tony.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Guglielmo, and I'd like to welcome you to TransLink's second open board meeting of 2021. Thank you all of you for joining us virtually today. So at this point, I'd like to call today's meeting to order. I'd like to start by saying that we acknowledge, respect, and celebrate the Indigenous nations on whose territories we are fortunate to live, work, operate, and serve, and recognize that in planning and managing the region's transportation system, we have a role to play in supporting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. I'd also like to highlight that this will be Gigi Chenko's last board meeting serving as interim CEO at TransLink. Gigi stepped into this leadership position at an important time for TransLink right before the province entered the third wave of the pandemic. She demonstrated exceptional leadership as TransLink supported vaccination efforts in the region, continued to prioritize the safety of customers and employees, and move forward key projects for the enterprise. Gigi has led in multiple capacities over her years at TransLink and will be returning to her role as General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Corporate Services following the transition in leadership to Kevin Quinn in July. So on behalf of all the board, I'd like to say a sincere thank you, Gigi, for the dedication and consistency you've demonstrated in your role as interim CEO over the past 5 months, and for your commitment to serving our region and the people of Metro Vancouver. So we have a lot to discuss today, so we will begin our meeting with the first item on the agenda, which is the public delegations. We have a number of speakers today. The first speaker is Mr. Peter Maher.
Yes, speaking.
Yes, hi, Peter. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes to present your report.
Sure, it's only going to take me a couple of minutes, that's all. Good morning, Board of Directors and the Chairman of the Board. My name is Peter Maher. I'm 90 years old. I take a bus 6 days a week. The subject is a bus stop balancing Route 17, bus stop 50806 southbound, bus stop 50753 northbound, situated at 43rd and Oak Street in Vancouver, BC. Before the bus stop was removed, I did all my grocery shopping twice a week, all the household shopping, and taking laundry to clean this, and so on and so on. Since the bus stop's been removed, I can't do any of the above chores. I can't carry the grocery walking about 3 blocks with a weight of over 10 pounds. I'm a senior with limited income. I can't afford to take a taxi costing $15 plus to help me with my groceries. As I stated in my letter, it takes a bus 14 seconds to stop, pick me up at bus stop 50753 northbound, and 10 seconds to stop and drop me off at bus stop 50806 southbound. It's a total of 24 seconds is charged to a bus stopping at a resting bus stop. There's no cost to the TransLink. I do hope the board will reconsider regarding removal of the bus stops. In passing, I'd like to thank Drew, the board, and the chairman for allowing me time to offer my views. Thanks a lot. That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. We appreciate you making your report to the board. I'm just going to ask Jeff, who's our, if he maybe can do an initial response to Peter's report.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Mr. Maher, for coming today. We are aware of your situation, and our team has, I can assure the board, has reached out to Mr. Maher. This stop was closed temporarily as we go through our bus balancing program and are assessing the impacts of that. We work closely with the municipalities. We do consultation and try and make sure that we are getting the right balance, if you will, of stop density so that people have easy access, like Mr. Maher pointed out, but not too much so that while each stop only may be 20 seconds, if you add that up over many stops, it starts to slow down the buses. But we are especially looking at the impacts related to seniors and people with mobility challenges or disabilities. So we haven't made any decisions yet. We will be looking at this next week, and we'll reach out to Mr. Maher and we'll make sure we find the right balance on that. So
Good, I'm sure you will. Thanks a lot, eh?
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Jeff.
Okay, bye now.
Okay, take care.
Okay, bye.
Okay, we have a number of speakers who are going to be touching base on the Handy Dart issue that in terms of the registration process and some of the other modernization issues that we've been dealing with. So, but prior maybe to those speakers coming on, maybe I'll just ask Jeff or Sarah if they wanted to just make a few comments, maybe to set the stage for what the speakers are going to be talking to us about.
So I'll take that, Tony, and Sarah will be presenting later on all the work that she and her team and the Access Transit team at CMBC have been doing in this regard. And first off, I want to thank all the public delegates and all the consultation that we did, and we'll talk about that later, who have really informed and shaped what the recommendation is that's coming forward to you. It's different than what we initially proposed before the consultation, and this is a point where we heard loud and clear from the stakeholders, from the users, from the people of interest who have lived and breathed this, what the principles of this should be. So we believe that we are well aligned with where the speakers are today, but we'll see and be able to reflect afterwards to make sure that we found the sweet spot. And we are obviously open to ensuring that as we go forward, looking especially at the eligibility requirements, that they're done so respectfully and meet the needs of our users. So I think we'll leave it at that, and then we can speak afterwards to where we're at with the recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. So we'll turn to our second speaker, Tim Lewis. Tim, are you on the line there?
Good morning. I am, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. We can hear you. So go ahead.
Good morning. Tim Lewis, Chair of the Handy Dart User Advisory Committee. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, senior management. I will be brief today. You have a busy schedule. I'm very pleased to be here today as a celebration of a consensus between the disability community on the one hand, and your senior management led by Sarah Ross on the other hand. A bit of background is in order. Quite some time ago, your senior management decided that for new applicants for Handy Dart registration, a new requirement would come into place: in-person interviews as part of the registration process. The disability community, for good reason, was very concerned and strongly opposed to this new proposal. The opposition was wide, it was deep, it was varied, and it was related to a number of points, the scope of which I will not concern you with today in the interest of time. Just some of those concerns. The appointment might be a burden for some individuals. It also might be that the applicant's unique needs could not be properly assessed or adequately evaluated by a stranger, but better by that person's own GP, as well as many other concerns. I would like to tip my hat today to your senior management, and Sarah Ross in particular, for not just listening to that wide range of opposition, valid, concrete opposition, but hearing that opposition and changing course. I want to recognize today, Mr. Chairman, that an organization the size of TransLink might be analogous to a large ocean liner. Changing course is not easy, simple, or doable in a short amount of time. And yet Ms. Ross has changed the course, having listened to and heard from the disability community. The motion before you today no longer envisions in-person interviews by a stranger retained by TransLink as being mandatory. That will now simply be an option. The other option being the interview and a more robust paper application via the GP. Thank you, Ms. Ross, members of the management, the board today. I'm looking forward to a continued positive, productive partnership between the disability community on the one hand, TransLink on the other hand, that makes this region candidate a model candidate for the rest of Canada. Thank you very much.
Tony, you're muted, Tony.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Tim, for your comments. We really appreciate you coming and speaking to the board today. We will go to the next speaker. Laura, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your last name right, but McDonald?
Yes.
For the rest of Canada. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Sorry, Laura, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but
1 second, please, while I'm turning
Alt space, menu bar, close,
off
menus,
the live stream. Thank you. Am I live now?
I think I can hear you now, Laura. There's some other noise there, but I think that's gone away now. So please go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Laura McEnroe, and I'm the past co-chair of the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee for the City of Vancouver. I am also the current vice chair of the TransLink's Handy Dart Users Advisory Committee. In fall 2019, Vancouver's Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee was approached by the Access Transit Department staff to discuss proposed changes to the Handy Dart registration process. At this time, the TransLink staff talked about an in-person interview assessment, which would likely be done by an occupational therapist. The Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee had strong concerns that to do this would create huge barriers for applicants. On January 21st, 2020, the Persons with Disabilities passed motions with their official positions that they were against having an in-person consultation process. On April 8th, 2021, TransLink staff met with the Disabilities Advisory Committee again. Community experts and representatives from the Seniors Advisory Committee. During this almost 2-hour meeting, all of the attendees expressed their grave concerns that the Handy Dart application process should not include a mandatory in-person assessment process. During the TransLink Handy Dart Users Advisory Committee meetings in 2020, I and others continued to voice our concerns about the in-person consultation. On April 21st, 2021, the HDUAC had a meeting, and almost all but one voiced their strong concerns against having this process. And then on June 2nd, 2021, the Handy Dart Users Advisory Committee unanimously passed a motion stating that we did not want a mandatory in-person interview process. I am grateful to hear that the concerns of the Handy Dart UAC and those of other community groups have been heard, and what is being proposed to you today is a new registration process where future users can have the choice of how they apply, either to go through an interview assessment or to use a paper application with their own medical practitioner verifies. However, it's important to mention that the wording in Resolution 1A is a little unclear and indicates that the in-person consultation will replace the current application process. And that's not what really we're talking about here today. It's important that the wording of Resolution 1A clearly indicates that the new process will have the choice. I believe that Jill Weiss, who is speaking here today, has drafted a new Resolution 1A, and I fully support this new drafted version. There are 4 other points I'd like to quickly make. First, the majority of custom transit rides in Canada are still being given by systems that use a paper application process that is verified by a medical practitioner. The largest system, Montreal, still uses a paper application with medical verification, and the second largest, Toronto, recently has gone back from an in-person assessment process to a mostly paper application process. So this is still best practices for the use in Canada. Secondly, I am totally in favor of the use of travel training and believe that TransLink should hire people with disabilities and seniors to be the trainers. Third, in order to maximize the funding for Handy Dart and the increased demand for rides over the years, more taxis should be used in our system. Montreal uses almost 3 times the amount of rides for almost the same amount, and they use taxis. Last, I think that the proposed fare changes for seniors and youth is a fantastic first step to make the system more equitable. However, I still think it's discriminatory to not allow people with disabilities who use the concession rates on conventional transit to not be able to use their concession card on Handy Dart and to have to pay the full fare, as well as the unfairness to people who have the CNIB card or the province's annual pass. In conclusion, please accept the report presented today, which will allow potential users the choice of either an in-person application or a paper application with medical verification. But please amend 1A so that it is more clear and accurately reflects this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate you coming and speaking to the board. Our next speaker is Jill Weiss. Jill, are you able to hear us here? We'll just wait a second to see if Jill is on the line.
Jill is on the line.
Oh, great, Jill. Thank you. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, Jill. Please go ahead.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, hello, Jill.
Hello?
Yeah. You're ready to go,
okay.
Jill.
Okay, thank you very much.
No,
Chair and members of the TransLink board. My name is Jill Weiss. I am the former chair of the City of Vancouver Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee and the former president of the Umbrella Group for People with Disabilities in British Columbia. I am a researcher by profession, and transportation for seniors and persons with disabilities is one of my areas of expertise. I was Canada's representative on the steering committee for the 4th International Conference on Mobility and Transportation for Elderly and Disabled Persons in 1984, and I have been researching best practices in transit for people with disabilities for over 50 years. From that perspective, I believe the Handy Dart modernization registration process is a significant improvement, with conditional eligibility and travel training to improve sustainability, and a new registration process with 2 options. Applicants will be able to choose an in-person consultation, or they can choose a longer paper application with medical verification. Both of these application options provide TransLink with much more information than is currently gathered, and the application options ensure the process is effective and fair. I thus support Resolutions 1 and 2, but with one important change. Resolution 1A has a significant flaw. It indicates that an in-person consultation replaces the current medical verification requirement, And as noted in your report, this is exactly what disability groups objected to. It is really important that the wording of the resolution clearly reflects that the new process gives applicants 2 application options, and that this 2-option process is what replaces the current registration process. So specifically, I recommend that Resolution 1A be amended to say, develop an application process that provides better understanding of applicants' needs and abilities. And that's the same, and here's the new part. The new application process will replace current medical verification requirements and will have 2 options. 1, an in-person consultation, or 2, a longer paper application with medical verification. This will ensure the HandyDart application is both effective and fair. It is important to ensure the HandyDart application does not consist of a required in-person interview, and the reason is simple. Research and reports show that about 20% of people will not attend an in-person interview, and they thus lose their service, not because they're not eligible, but because they're not able to go through the process. The important point is that an in-person application is a barrier, and people are eliminated from an essential service, not because they don't qualify, but because the application process itself is a barrier. So if Resolution 1A is changed to reflect that the in-person consultation will be an application option and not that it will replace the current medical verification, that a 2-option process is what will replace the current process, then people who can't do an in-person application can still apply and use HandyDart using a paper application verified by their physician. And if anyone has difficulty using a paper application, they can choose the in-person application. This makes it possible for applicants to apply in the way that works best for them, and their HandyDart use will depend on their qualifications, not on their vulnerability. And the measures that improve sustainability, travel training, and conditional eligibility can be effectively used with either application option. So again, I support the passage of Resolutions 1 and 2 as long as the wording in 1A is changed so that the in-person consultation does not replace the current application process, but instead is an option in the new application process. If that is done, it will be an effective and fair application process that includes important measures to improve sustainability. That's it.
Great, Jill. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming to the board meeting today, and with your recommendation. Just to let you know that we have changed the order of the agenda. So right after the last speaker, we're going to bring the HandyDart modernization registration process. We're going to discuss that, and we're going to discuss the change that you're proposing at that time. So I do appreciate you bringing that to the board's attention, and we'll deal with that right after the last public speaker has spoken. So thank you again, Jill.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Jean Swanson. Jean,
yeah.
Are you there?
I am.
Okay, Jean, go ahead. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So hi, everybody. I'm Jean Swanson. I'm a Vancouver City Councillor. I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the stolen territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people, and thank them for taking care of this land for thousands of years and commit to trying to get it back to them or get them compensated for it. I came here today to tell you that the majority of our Vancouver Council is opposed to a mandatory in-person consultation process as a condition of HandyDart eligibility. Hopefully you've all seen the email I sent you, which was signed by 8 of our councillors. When I first saw the proposal for an in-person interview by a hired consultant, I thought, oh no, that sounds like applying for welfare, which can be a really humiliating process. Vancouver's Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee is opposed to the mandatory in-person interview too. They passed a resolution explaining why they were opposed to it. And here's some quotes from their resolution. In-person applications do reduce the number of people applying for HandyDART before their eligibility can be assessed because many people aren't willing or able to go through the process. Reductions between 10 and 20% have been reported in Canada. The persons who do not apply have been eliminated from paratransit use, not because they don't qualify, but because many are not willing or able to go through the process. In-person applications are difficult for people with mental health conditions, cognitive disabilities, dementia, and persons with English as a second language. These are all quotes. The in-person application process is therefore a barrier to the use of HandyDART services, and the process eliminates the most frail and vulnerable users. More quotes. In-person applications discourage the persons applying for HandyDART because the process is humiliating, frightening, and invasive. And the in-person application process is also expensive, and the funds should be used for needed HandyDART service. So I'm hoping, as is most of our council, that you will heed the advice of our Persons with Disability Advisory Committee and make it so that in-person consultation for HandyDART eligibility is not mandatory. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean. And yes, that is part of the change that we have made as a result of the consultation. And then after, as I mentioned, the last speaker has finished with their remarks, we will get a presentation from staff, and we will also consider the change to the resolution that was put forward by Jill Weiss. So thank you, Jean, for coming to the board meeting today. Our next speaker is Jane Dyson. Jane, are you able to hear? Yeah, hi, Jane. Please go ahead.
Hi.
You're next. Yeah, we can hear you, Jane. Please go ahead. You're next.
Okay, thanks.
Jane, are you able to hear us?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Yes,
Okay,
good morning, everybody. I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, which includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Yes, my name is Jane Dyson. Yes. Yes. Can you not hear me?
No. Go ahead, Jane. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Coast. Before retiring in 2018, I was the Executive Director of Disability Alliance BC, a non-profit organization that works to improve the dignity and independence of people with disabilities through advocacy and frontline services. I was the ED for 10 years, and in 2015, I received the Order of BC for my. I've spent more than 20 years advocating for improvements to HandyDART in Metro Vancouver, starting in the days when the service was provided in 8 zones by 7 different providers. I've participated in various TransLink consultations on HandyDART and been fortunate to have developed good working relationships with a number of TransLink senior staff and CEOs, including Kevin Desmond. Mr. Desmond was particularly helpful in supporting our quest to see proximity readers installed on barrier gates at SkyTrain and Canada Line stations. I support the recommendations made by staff in the proposed changes to HandyDART fare structure report. I believe the recommendations will result in HandyDART users having a more equitable and straightforward system. I am, however, disappointed that the CNIB card and BC Bus Pass will remain ineligible for use on HandyDART. The justification is, and has been historically, that because these passes are provided through other programs and are provincial, they are beyond the scope of TransLink reviews or jurisdiction. To this, I can only respond with the old adage, where there is a will, there is a way. I also support staff's recommendations contained in the HandyDART Modernization Registration Report. As my colleagues have already indicated, conditional eligibility and travel training to improve HandyDART's sustainability are welcome. With respect to sustainability, I am, however, disappointed that more investigation is evidently not being recommended on increasing the use of taxis to supplement HandyDART trips. Taxi trips are significantly cheaper than HandyDART trips. Moreover, trips provided by taxis are usually shorter in duration than those on HandyDART. This is particularly beneficial for people with health conditions that make longer trips uncomfortable or in some cases next to impossible. It has been my experience that people with disabilities and seniors with such health conditions prefer taxis when given the choice being the key word here. Over the years, HandyDART has increasingly provided regularly scheduled medical trips such as those for dialysis. In the distant past, these trips were provided by an ambulance service. I'm not suggesting that we go back to those days, but I believe funding for health trips provided by an overburdened system that was not designed to be part of the health service is something that needs to be addressed with the province. For at least 15 years now, TransLink has floated the idea of in-person consultations for HandyDART applicants as a way to manage demand. The response of many HandyDART users, their support networks and advocates has been that while we agree that the current paper application needs improving, we do not support in-person eligibility consultations for HandyDART applications. As my colleague Jill Weiss highlighted in her presentation, her research demonstrates that when faced with in-person consultations, some individuals choose not to apply because they are unable to submit to or navigate the process. In addition to our concerns about the barrier to custom transit that in-person adjudications may present, at a fundamental level, the process in our view constitutes a step back in how people with disabilities and seniors qualify for a crucial service. We see it as an undignified and potentially more adversarial approach for people who depend on custom transit to live with dignity and independence in their communities. I support resolutions 1, parts B and C, and 2. Respectfully, I recommend staff's 1A be replaced with that of my colleague Jill Weiss's version, excuse me, for the reasons she outlined in her presentation. In sum, 1A needs to more clearly articulate that in-person evaluations will not replace the current application process, but rather are an option that applicants may choose. In closing, I want to commend TransLink staff, and particularly Sarah Ross, for listening and taking on board the profound concerns that I and my colleagues have registered this year and in previous consultations about the implementation of a mandatory in-person adjudication process for HandyDART applicants. Excuse me. I believe offering in-person consultations as an option rather than making them mandatory is a reasonable and balanced approach to the modernization of the HandyDART application process. Thank you for giving me the time to offer my thoughts to you today, and my apologies if this feedback it's because I have the YouTube video on as well as my phone. So there we go. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Yeah, we got off to a rough start, but we were able, I think, to hear you fairly clearly for the rest of the time. So appreciate you coming to the board and making those comments. Our next speaker is Nathan Davidovich. Nathan, are you on the line? Hello, Nathan, are you there? Making those comments. Our next speaker is Nathan Davidovich. Nathan, are you on the line?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
I think Nathan's on mute.
Nathan, are you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Nathan, we can just hear you now. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my name is Nathan Davidovich, and I'm the retired chairman of the Citizens Transit Advisory Committee at Vancouver City Hall. And TransLink continued to make decisions that make transit less accessible, less comfortable, and worse for the environment. The handed-out modernization plan was written by somebody new to Metro Vancouver who was not around in the late 1970s when the handout was set up by the GVRD, which is now Metro Vancouver. I attended the advisory meetings back then, and the full history of custom transit has to be told, and the BC government should implement a better handout for the 21st century. We can't have one policy at TransLink, at different policies in other transit system. It has to be one policy for BC, not different policies. The fare increase on July 1st, and now we're going to have a fare decrease on October 1st for some users. This is not a proper way of doing business, but that just shows how disconnect the different departments at TransLink are. You only make a fare change once a year, not twice a year or 3 times a year or whatever. TransLink Vice President Steve Vangas, he does not want to talk to me or to the 4 international transit experts that all been in Vancouver and some still live here, Jared Walker, Alan Levy, Joe Salmona, and Todd Littman. Todd Littman's new book on mobility actually is coming out today, and you should all read it to understand what mobility is. TransLink has been destroying our good transit system in the city of Vancouver for the last 130 years, and something has to be changed, and I think the provincial government is going to make changes, and we're not going to have the same TransLink next year at your annual meeting. Treating transportation as an essential service and mobility as a human right would go far in eliminating existing inequalities. Thank you very much for your hearing me.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. And now our last speaker is Juliana. Are you on the line?
I am on the line. Hello.
Okay, go ahead. We can hear you quite well.
Okay, that's great. Hi, my name is Juliette Cressman, and I am an individual that has used HandyDart excessively in the past. I'm under the understanding that there's been some changes being possibly made regarding how you apply, how you are made eligible, etc. And I understand the part about in-person interviews has been removed as part of it. Is that correct?
Yes, that the mandatory requirement is just an option now.
Okay, that's good, because there's many individuals that it would be very difficult for them to do it in person. But the other part of it that I found very concerning was that it was no longer going to be an application done through a family doctor. And the reason I'm concerned about that is because many disabilities are not visible and are difficult to ascertain just talking to an individual. So my main concern is how the criteria will be met to determine whether the person is an acceptable applicant for the HandyDart system. I understand the budgets need to be met, etc., but at the same time, I have to say this is a service that is essential. I've seen many times when there's been clients that had dementia, for example, they couldn't even tell you where their address was. They couldn't remember. And if the driver didn't know them and didn't know how to contact certain people and have a system in place, they would have really been in trouble. We've had people get on the bus that have severe emotional challenges that are difficult to handle. We've had people that were just having surgery and were just needing HandyDart for a short period of time because they had a hip replacement, etc. But we also have people that were going to dialysis, you name it. It meets a whole gamut of people's needs. And I just really want to ensure that the application process does not leave out people that genuinely deserve the service and would have been accepted had a GP done the application. So from my point of view, as an advocate and as someone who's a chaplain and a counselor, I think it would be really, really important to have a physician involved that knows the client as part of the application process. I really don't want to see that removed. But I think it's an essential service, and I am really grateful that it's been available. There were times that I was very unwell and was unable. I was using my wheelchair all the time, and I needed it. So I just am grateful that it's available, but I would like to see it continue in such a way that whoever genuinely needs it can get it.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Juliana, for coming and speaking to the board. I'm not sure if you heard, but we did reorder the agenda. So staff, right after you're the last speaker, so staff will be addressing this issue. And I'm sure they'll address the questions that you raised in your presentation. So why don't we turn to that right now so that we can continue the conversation while everything's sort of fresh in our minds. So Jeff, I'm going to turn to you. I'm not sure if you or Sarah are going to be leading this discussion, but I'll turn it over to either you or Sarah.
Thank you, Tony. I'll just kick it off very briefly. What we're going to do is there are two items. Most of the speakers have, the delegates have spoken to the actual registration proposal that's included in your item. We also, Sarah's going to go through the sort of suite of things that we were consulting on together, the changes to the tariff as well in one, and then we can take some questions, and then you can go through those two reports in order and consider the actual recommendations. Following that, Christine Dacre will actually present the proposed fair tariff related to the changes and discounts age-based. So we're really appreciative, I'll say that again, of the 7 different or 8 different delegates that came forward, and we do believe that the work that we've been doing is a value add. We've heard a lot of constructive input from our stakeholders, from the community, from users, from healthcare professionals, from our peers about how this can work. And I think we, as the chair, Tim Lewis, said, we found a good consensus that amongst both what our recommendation is and where those users are that we believe will really help. One other thing I want to point out, this isn't the only thing that we're doing with Handy Dart modernization. There was a request to look at overall demand and thinking about taxis and the role. That's an ongoing conversation that we will continue to look at. We've just separated out this piece, which we think is a really important upstream element of that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah and then maybe just emphasize a few things at the end.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you also to the delegates who've taken the time to be here to share their perspectives directly with you. I just have a few slides, about 7, I think. So if we could move on to the first slide, that'd be great. So there's about 19,000 active Handy Dart customers. And pre-COVID, we delivered 5,000 trips a day on Handy Dart. And each year we process about 9,000 applications, although I do note that only about half of those people ever take a single trip. So an interesting stat. If you move to the next slide, you know, as you're aware, we undertook a significant review of the Handy Dart service in 2016 and 17. And since then, we've been working on implementing and advancing the 27 recommendations the board approved. A couple of things to highlight. As you know, we've been expanding service, delivering more trips since 2017. We've introduced a travel training program, and in 2019, we were very active. We reached over 3,500 seniors and people with disabilities. We adapted during COVID to reach out to the seniors and people with disabilities that were isolated due to COVID in 2020, but continue to reach out to about 1,000 people. We have extensive online travel training tools. But we know there is still more work to be done to ensure that our HandyDart service provides the best customer experience it possibly can. Next slide, please. We have an inconsistency in fares between HandyDart and the conventional system. Right now, all HandyDart trips are a one-zone adult fare. On the conventional system, youth and seniors can access discounts. A senior or a youth that, due to a disability, requires a trip on HandyDart currently has to pay more than they would if they were able to use the conventional system. Next slide, please. We're concerned about the long-term sustainability of HandyDart and the growing demand for the service. 70% of HandyDart customers are seniors, and the population of the region is aging, and that's going to increase the numbers of people who need HandyDart. And as you can see in this graph, yes, ridership has dropped dramatically because of COVID, but we are expecting that that will rebound in 2022, and by 2023 will be above the amount of service that we're currently able to provide. And yes, we absolutely need to continue to expand HandyDart service. And we also need to support as many people as possible to use the conventional system so that we can ensure a high quality of experience when people require HandyDart. Next slide, please. Earlier this spring, TransLink undertook engagement on a package of improvements to HandyDart under the banner of HandyDart modernization. We proposed accepting age-based discounts on HandyDart and updating the process of applying to HandyDart to shift to an in-person consultation so that we could ensure that customers are paired with the transit mode that best meets their needs. And an in-person consultation is also an opportunity for a conversation with about someone's abilities between the applicant and a medical provider, such as an occupational therapist whose training is to help people solve problems that interfere with their ability to do things that are important to them, but is someone who's also familiar with the ways in which the conventional system is accessible and what is involved in taking HandyDart. Next slide, please. There is a detailed report on the consultation process, all of the different ways we consulted and what we heard, and that's all included in the board package, and I'll just highlight a few things. We heard very broad support for the proposed changes to fares. We heard that people share our concern about the increasing pressure on our growing and aging population is putting on HandyDart, that there is support for introducing conditional eligibility, for learning more about applicants' needs and abilities, and for supporting people to understand all their transit options through both an expanded education program and introducing an in-person component to the application process. But we heard very strong opposition to making an in-person component mandatory. The majority of people we heard from were very concerned that a mandatory in-person process would introduce a barrier for some applicants, creating a hoop they'd have to jump through, making it harder, not easier, to access HandyDart. And as you heard from some of the delegates, they aren't opposed to an in-person process being provided as an option, because for some people, that may be easier than filling out a form. But also, as the delegates so well articulated, the clear feedback was that people applying for HandyDart should have the option of working with their own medical provider to provide TransLink with the required information. Next slide, please. So in response to that feedback, the recommendation included in the staff report is that we update the process for applying to HandyDart to include an in-person component, and that we also provide an alternative, an option for applicants who prefer to provide that necessary information by filling out a longer form with their own medical provider. We also propose providing an expedited process for applicants over 85 with a disability and those who are applying for temporary access. Perhaps they've had knee surgery and need HandyDart for a period of a number of months. And then finally, we propose continuing to expand travel training and supporting as many people as possible to use the conventional system. Next slide, please. So to close, the reports in your package have recommendations seeking your support for updating the application process, as I've just described, and also to introduce discounted fares for seniors and youth. And if approved, this will mean that about 70% of HandyDART customers will pay less effective October 1st when Compass is rolled out on HandyDART. Jeff, back to you.
Yeah. So two things I'd like to emphasize. Thank you, Sarah. And I want to say again to Sarah's team, including Brianna Ingram and our colleague Kathy Pereira and Mike McDaniel's team, who have spent a lot of time leaning in and listening and adjusting path. I think it's really important and best practice. Two things. This in-person interview that we're talking about, as we're all experiencing today, in-person may be virtual. So we heard from a lot of the delegates that the hurdle of doing an in-person interview may be one of the things just getting there. We know that there can potentially be virtual ways, just like there are right now with your doctor that we've been developing to make this a little bit more seamless. That will definitely be something that we would be exploring. Secondly, on the proposed change to 1A that was proposed by the delegate Jill Weiss and others, I think staff at this point would view that as a friendly amendment, if you will, that better captures the point that these are two options, that we're not trying to steer people to one or the other and make it more difficult on the long form, that we would go forward through a design process, working again with the same users and stakeholders to make sure that it's fair, respectable, and respects their time, I should say, and it's easy and legible. So I think that's it from the staff perspective. We're happy to take questions at this point, Tony, on both of the reports before moving it to the recommendation.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Larry, you had a question?
No, actually, I have a comment. As the chair of the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee, I want to report that we've dealt with this a lot. We had a lot of discussion. We tracked the entire process with the staff, and our committee, I have to tell you, is very, very impressed with how the staff have listened. This is what consultation is really all about. We've been very, very happy to see the outcome that seemingly works for everyone. On the one hand, we believed and have always believed that the in-person creates a great opportunity to engage with our customers, to be able to discuss how they move around our system, the various options they have. But we also understood and listened as the advisors told us that some people that's just doesn't work for them. It's inconvenient and would be a barrier. And I was really pleased, and I think our committee was really pleased to see that as a result of that, we saw this, you might call it a compromise. I don't think it was a compromise. I think it was really more bringing together the two kinds of concerns into one coherent way to move forward that seems to work for everyone. And I think that's excellent. I must say that I also thought that Ms. Wise's amendment to the resolution did clarify, made it much more clear. I don't think staff meant anything different than that. And I was pleased when Mr. Cross confirmed that, in fact, the staff consider that a friendly amendment. I was very happy to hear that from Councillor Swanson that the Vancouver Council, can support the idea of this new way with these additional options for people. And I think it was clearly said by the staff that this process of modernization and refinement, today we're dealing with the process of application and fare changes, but they'll continue to have discussions on refining and modernizing the system. And I think we all have to remember back 4 years ago when the system was clearly broken and everyone came and told us that, and maybe it was 5 years ago now, I lose track, but came and told us the system was broken. And Sarah, you have led the way from that moment. I remember it was one of my first board meetings. You have led the way in a very thoughtful and responsible, respectful, and inclusive way to go through these problems You were supported by our CEO, Kevin Desmond, at the time and through this process. But this has been getting a better service literally every year. And this, I think, is a step forward for us to be able to give people better ideas about moving around transit and also be able to manage the volume so that we make sure this is available to the people who really need it all the time for moving around in the region. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move the resolutions in regard to the application process as put forward, but amending 1A as per Ms. Wise's recommendation. And perhaps Sarah Clark, as our chair of our finance committee, might want to move the resolution about fare change. I'll leave that up to her. So I'll move that one resolution. And I must say, I'm moving it with great happiness today because this is the right direction. This is good government. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Larry. We have a few more speakers, so maybe before we get to the resolution, we'll let the other folks also comment. Lorraine?
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, Sarah and Jeff, for your report. I would like to echo Larry's comments about the impressive work that's gone on over the last while on this file. I was interested in one of the speakers' comments about the difference of taxis being used in regions around our country. And with our aging population, I was wondering what's coming next in this evolution around the whole taxi program, Sarah, particularly, because I know you've been working on this, to see if we can make the taxis a more robust program or portion of our program so that people do get there faster and more efficient for them.
I can speak to that.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes, taxis are an important part of delivering the HandyDART service. They're about 10 to 15% of the trips are delivered by taxis. And we certainly have heard what was a very big focus in that review in 2016, 2017, that people support using taxis, but they wanted us to do more to ensure that they had a much better experience in taking taxis, that to try to get the level of customer service that they experience while they're taking a HandyDART trip from on a HandyDART vehicle with a HandyDART driver, that they have a more comparable experience when they're also taking taxis. So we've been doing work over the years to improve that, to build better relationships with the taxi community. And the credit to that is really to Kathy Pereira at CNBC and her team, working on things like, sometimes, just really tangible things like, I come out of an event and how do I, there's 20 taxis. How do I know which one is my HandyDART taxi, especially if I'm a person with vision loss, and trying to improve that. So, as we also look and continuing to look forward on the delivery of this service, and as the transportation industry evolves and new tools and new options emerge, I think we do need to look on that and what continued role taxis should play in the delivery of service, or will play in the delivery of service.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Marcella?
Thank you, Tony. I too echo the eloquence of Larry. Well done, Larry. I would also like to thank and acknowledge those who've come to us over the years, less these years than 4 and 5 years ago, but it is your influence that has helped us and staff and management change things and become an entity that we can proudly say serves everyone, regardless of your mobility. And we hope to continue doing it. My question actually is just around a comment, part of the report Jeff or Sarah, I don't know who wants to address it. You mentioned that your proposal is to review this 5 years, which I think a review is really important. My question is really, why 5 years? Why not 3, for instance, or 4? What makes 5 years the good number?
I don't think it's a magic number, Marcella, but I think what we recognize is it's probably going to take a bit of time, especially on this new review process, to develop it, to work with the stakeholders, to effectively go through a change management, and then to understand how are they receiving it, how is it working, is it a value add, are there tweaks to it, how is it adjusting actually the usage on the conventional system, and is it changing demand, or do we need to really consider revamping it a bit? So I think it would just be best practice in order to be able to come back and say this isn't a one-shot deal. Maybe if we get it up a little bit sooner, we come back a little bit sooner.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marcella. Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I will just echo some of the previous comments in terms of supporting the amended motion that's been put forward. I think it strikes a good balance between still supporting the intent of looking at this modernization and the opportunities there, while at the same time responding to and respecting what we learned through the public engagement process. I know as we engage in this work, the last thing anyone at TransLink or at the board level wanted to do was to create any additional barriers to make it more difficult for people to access this important service. And I think where we've landed has removed any potential barriers, but still added the elements to make some improvements and give greater opportunity for trip training and other planning to really make the service as effective and as efficient as possible. I think we also need to recognize, HandyDART has always played an important role in our transportation system, but I think it's going to be something that is going to be increasingly challenges as our aging demographic begins to age. And I think although this does address some issues, I think this is going to be an ongoing work item for both TransLink and the board to make sure that we are continuing updating, getting the resources, and ensuring the trips are needed there. I think we all saw that graph that Sarah presented, where within a few years demand is going to strip what's currently budgeted there, and that's going to be a red flag for us moving forward as we continue to work and make sure that we can provide this important service that I think is from a need perspective is only going to increase into the future.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Murray.
Thank you, Tony. I too also support the amended resolution, but I want to pick up on something that Lorraine had started to talk about, was the taxis. And it seems to me it's important that we very quickly and thoroughly review how taxis are involved in the process of providing a service to HandyDART customers. And I say that in view of the fact that the comment that was made this morning that in fact taxi trips tend to be faster trips than those made using HandyDART buses, and lower cost trips generally than those made using HandyDART buses. So it seems to me that in the context of the available budget for HandyDART, that we should be putting a focus, especially if our HandyDART customers, those that can use taxis and would prefer to use taxis, are interested in using taxis, and we could stretch our budget dollars farther and have more available trips to the people that need to use HandyDART as a service. So from my perspective, that's something that I think needs to be given some priority.
Great, thank you, Murray. Jonathan, is your hand still up from last time, or did you have another question?
Sorry about that. Forgot to take it.
Okay, great, thank you. So Larry has moved the amended resolution, and I think just for clarity, Jennifer, do you want to just maybe read out what the amended resolution or how it reads?
Sure, Tony, I'm happy to do that. And so I'll read through item 1A, as that's the amended part, and the rest of the resolution would be the same as what's in the report proposed by management. So the resolution is that the TransLink Board of Directors authorizes and requests that management, number one, update the process for individuals to apply for HandyDART by designing a customer-oriented application experience, engaging with customers and stakeholders through the design process. Two, sub A, develop an application process that provides better understanding of applicants' needs and abilities, which will replace the current medical verification requirements and will have two options. Sub one, an in-person consultation, or two, a longer paper-based application with medical verification. And then it goes through B, C, and two as proposed in the report.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. So that's the resolution that was moved by Larry. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Andy. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you very much, Jeff and Sarah. And thank you to all the speakers again who came and presented to the board. We really did appreciate that feedback and that input. So there's just one last item related to this, and that's the tariff amendment. And Chris, you're going to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Tony. So as Sarah and Jeff already spoke about the age-based discounts on HandyDART, this transit tariff amendment includes those changes, which will provide lower fares for seniors and youth. And there's also several operational and housekeeping changes included in the amendment, which is included in the report as well. So we have a proposed resolution to consider and adopt these tariff changes as in the report.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now, Sarah, your committee reviewed this and I think made a recommendation to the board. So did you want to speak to it or move the resolution?
Yes, I will move it. And I understand our speaker's point around changing fares twice in a year, but we do see this change as fostering a more equitable fare solution system, and don't think that we should delay that based on that we've had two changes in a year. We'd like it to be as soon as possible that people can be benefiting from this and improving their experience. So I will move the motion.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. So that's carried unanimously as well. Okay, so we'll now move back to the agenda in terms of the regular order. And we'll start with the CEO report. And Gigi, you're going to walk us through that.
Yes, thank you, Tony. So good morning, everyone. Today, I want to start by acknowledging that this meeting is taking place during National Indigenous History Month and only a few days before we will celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st. I wanted to also comment that just a few weeks ago, Canadians were from coast to coast were shocked to learn about the discovery of the remains of 215 Indigenous children buried at the site of what was once Canada's largest residential school in Kamloops, and that this horrific news and this heartbreaking legacy of residential schools has really devastated the people across Canada, as many of us struggle to understand our nation's past. And alongside all Canadians, employees across the TransLink enterprise also mourn these children who never made it home, and also those parents who never got to see their children again, who lost their children. And to honor and recognize the lives of the 215 children in Kamloops, flags across our enterprise were flown at half-mast, and our frontline staff, including SkyTrain attendants and transit operators, were invited to wear orange shirts, and orange ribbons were placed on the mirrors of buses throughout the region. And also to help further our journey toward reconciliation, we'll be holding a speaker series for our employees on National Indigenous Peoples Day to shine the light on reconciliation and to learn and understand what needs to be done to continue to move forward. Across the enterprise, we know we have a responsibility to advance reconciliation every single day of the year, not just National Indigenous Peoples Day. And that's why we're committing to further our own knowledge and understanding really of the hard truths of our past and how we can move forward together. So we'll have more to say on this in the weeks and months ahead. Next slide, please. So we're really encouraged to see the numbers of the COVID cases decreasing in our province and the percentage of vaccinated British Columbians going up. Obviously, this is a very positive development and one that does affect us directly as an enterprise. With respect to masks specifically, currently they are mandatory on our system and in public indoor places, but as we are in step 2 currently. But as we move into further steps of the BC Restart Plan, we'll be following provincial guidelines as to when to move from masks being mandatory to recommended. And we'll be sure to notify employees and customers in advance of that change so that there is broad awareness of that. We also consult regularly with our peer transportation agencies, including BC Transit and BC Ferries, to make sure our mask policies are aligned and coordinated for our customers. And as we navigate through steps 3 and 4 of the BC Restart Plan, we'll continue to work closely with public health officials and adhere to public health orders. And upon entering step 3 of the Restart Plan, we'll also be able to begin gradually increasing bus capacity and vehicle capacity limits, including SkyTrain as well. So currently we're working closely with the BC Provincial Health Officer, Transport Canada, WorkSafe BC to discuss those transit capacity limits and ensure we are complying with all requirements. Next slide, please. So I also want to update you on a new partnership we began earlier this month with Operation Lifesaver Canada. This is a not-for-profit agency that's dedicated to preventing fatalities, including suicides, around railway property specifically. And I must say, I'm devastated every time I hear the news that another person has taken their life on our system. So TransLink's partnering with Operation Lifesaver to remind those who may be struggling with mental health issues that help is available. As part of the initiative, our enterprise is providing Operation Lifesaver with in-kind ad space on our system for their suicide prevention public awareness program. And customers will see these posters at SkyTrain, West Coast Express, and Canada Line platforms. In total, there's going to be 37 posters. And we're really proud to do our part to support this important initiative and protect our communities. Next slide, please. Also pleased to share with you that our team is moving forward on our next customer experience action plan. So many of you on the board will remember when we first released our customer experience action plan, the first phase in 2019. It really outlined customers' ideas and initiatives, really helped shape some of the big improvements that we've made on transit, from double-decker buses to digital information displays to tap to pay. We also introduced our customer promise, which is to always put you first, your safety, your time, and your connection to the people and places that matter most. So that promise continues to guide us each and every day as we work in the public interest. And to ensure we continue delivering on that promise, particularly as we emerge from the pandemic, we've been working on our new customer experience action plan. This plan is going to set out our customer experience strategy, priorities, projects, and initiatives roadmap for the next 5 years. Our customer satisfaction reached an all-time high in 2020, and now, with the development of this new plan, we want to hear from our customers about how we can do even better. In the coming weeks, the public will have an opportunity to weigh in and share their ideas through our TransLink Listens HQ website. It's important to hear from our customers as we develop the plan that is going to benefit them. Next slide, please. So speaking of moving forward, as you know, this meeting marks my last one as interim CEO. And following a competitive international search, our new CEO, Kevin Quinn, is going to take the reins on July 19th. And so I look forward to introducing Kevin to our amazing organization and all the dedicated people who work here. I guess I'll essentially be the bridge between the two Kevins. And as I mentioned in my remarks earlier today during the AGM, it has truly been an honor for me to serve in this role between February and July and to help steward the enterprise during a period of great uncertainty and transition. I've been an employee of the TransLink enterprise since its inception in 1999, and also before that, BC Transit. I started quite young, as you can tell. And I do care deeply about the TransLink enterprise and all of the employees and our shared mission to serve the public, the people of Metro Vancouver, which includes our own friends, families, and neighbors. And when I first began this role, I noted that the key word for me during this period was stability. And as interim CEO, my goal was to keep us on course during a period of transition, ensure we keep moving forward on our key corporate projects and major initiatives, and that we continue delivering exceptional service each and every day. I also took the opportunity to share a little bit about myself and my perspectives with the employees within our enterprise. And by so doing, I hope that others will be encouraged to share their diverse perspectives as well. And so these past months have been a highlight of my career, and I want to thank the board once again for entrusting me with this very unexpected opportunity. And I also want to publicly thank the leadership teams at TransLink, Coast Mountain Bus Company, BC Rapid Transit Company, West Coast Express, and Transit Police for their amazing support and dedication. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Gigi. And as I mentioned earlier, we really do appreciate you stepping in and undertaking this role, particularly during this challenging time. And we really thank you for the dedication and your leadership that you have provided over the last few months. Are there any questions or comments for Gigi? Okay, I don't see any, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report from Michelle.
Wait. I wanted to say something to Gigi.
Okay, Lorraine, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I mean, Gigi's done an amazing job, and I just want to say thank you. To echo your comments, Tony, I think that it's been, we asked her, she stepped up, and she's done an awesome job, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Here, 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 here.
Deserve the thank you.
Here. Well done.
And that's, I'm sure that's a sentiment from everyone else on the board as well. So thank you, Lorraine, for those comments. Okay, so we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, which is a report from Michelle Dedrac, who's our President General Manager of the BC Rapid Transit Company. Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, board members. Next slide, please. A regular agenda. I think the story I want to tell you today is that BCRTC is always on a path to do better every day for our customers, but also for our people. And hopefully the next slides will show you something of that. Next slide, please. So since the moment I arrived, zero harm was on top of my priorities, and we keep continuing putting time and effort in keeping people safe from harm and making sure that both passengers and employees can go home uninjured to their families and friends. What you see here is that 2018 was a little bit of an anomaly, but otherwise, since 2016, we have seen a continuous trend down, and we hope to continue our efforts. What we also see is that the number of mental health claims is gradually increasing. And also the number of days that people are off are gradually increasing. And some of it is related to the increased amount of trained human contact that we have seen. Unfortunately, that's a little bit more than we have experienced in the last decade, and possibly as a result of the stresses people go through due to COVID-19. But we're not resting on our laurels, so we keep continuing new initiatives. Within BCRTC, we're actively on our way to introduce a Safe Start program. Safe Start program is a program where we encourage people at the start of their day to think about what they're going to do and making sure that what they do adheres to safe working practices. We've also started with task safety observations during our performance week, about which I will talk a little bit more later, where with the safety advisor, we walk people through what they do on a day-to-day basis and see if we can identify any hazards. And hopefully that will continue to reduce our zero harm or increase our zero harm. Next slide, please. And I mentioned it before, is that we are paying extra attention to mental health initiatives, particularly because the current circumstances are so challenging for many, not only our customers, but also for own people. And we see more incidents on board trains and around stations. And therefore, our people have to cope with more incidents and more situations, and probably more so than they were used to in the past. And it's not why they went into this job. They went into this job to actually help people, and then sometimes they're put in circumstances where they actually have to help people in a completely different way. So what we're aiming at and what this shows is that we are trying to do as much as we can to prevent harm to people, or to help people if we observe that they might do things that will disrupt the service, but will also, if we can help them move forward, that's what we do. So we are trying to train our staff in identifying critical behaviors so that we can step in before it's too late. Next slide, please. Also, when we look from 2017 with the what seemed to be an anomaly in 2018, the downward trend in the number of injuries. And the most injuries that we're experiencing are still around slip, trips, and falls. And you may recall that a couple of years ago, we started this passenger injury committee that's still live, and we're still working through initiatives to see how we can keep passengers safe. And one of our most recognizable ones is the campaign we have during the winter months, where we advise people to be careful, hold on to rails, wear proper shoes and clothes in order to prevent slips, trips, and falls. Next slide, please. On-time performance. I think this is something we can be generally proud of. We have not underperformed since March 2020. Now I realize that we had fewer passengers, but the external circumstances haven't changed, and the people who sometimes did cause trouble haven't left the system either. So I think we're doing well. We're improving, and on overall we're far beyond above 96%, and it should put us in the best possible position to welcome our passengers back and to give them a reliable and safe journey. We do actually experience delays, and if you look at the long-term delays, say the delays below 30 minutes or below 60 minutes, they're kind of stable. We're one over what we were planning to have, but they're kind of stable, and we're trying to reduce them. Unfortunately, it's the major incidents, engineering works that cause these long delays. Something we try to prevent, as I mentioned earlier, but still. And when you look at the biggest cause, it's still track intrusion. We have lots of track intrusions. It could be relatively minor, but it's a major cause, and we're always trying to look in how we can improve that. The other one is door issues. No surprise there, because our doors open every day, all day, 24 hours. So that's one of our critical assets. Next slide, please. Now, it's important for BCRTC that we lead by example, and that our leadership reflects our people, and that our leadership is up to date and modern. So I won't go through this slide in detail, but I do want to say that EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusiveness is important to us, very much so. And for me, it's not something that comes on top of something else, right? It's not something extra. It should be part of our day-to-day behaviors. Everybody should feel welcome when they come to BCRTC. Everybody should feel safe when they come to BCRTC, and nobody should feel excluded when they come to BCRTC. And often, when you're a minority, no matter who or from what background, it's difficult to speak up to power, or to speak up to your colleagues, or to speak up to the majority. And it's been indicated that people find that difficult. So when we talk about just culture and leadership development and leadership training and everything else we do to create an inclusive environment, it's very much so that everybody feels heard, that they feel safe to speak up, that they're being listened to, and that we take their opinion into consideration when we make decisions. And not because it's extra on top of everything, but because we do it because it's BCRTC and that's how we like it. Next slide, please. Now, this is what keeps most of our people busy, particularly when you live near the railway lines, and that's our grinding program. And this, it might not seem that way, but this is actually a good news program. So when you look at the right-hand side at the bottom, you see what we have done last year. All the green is practically a whole network where we grinded the railway track in order to keep keep it in the best possible condition. Actually, we did almost 35,000 meters more this year than we did last year. And we did 4,000 meters more than we had targeted. So I think that's a great achievement. Also, we brought our grinding program forward. So we always used to do it in fall. And obviously, and then we would start again next fall. This year, we actually brought it forward to springtime, so that by the time that people start opening their windows and balcony doors, the noise should have reduced significantly. And I think we're still getting requests from people to inspect their own areas, and we do so and respond immediately. And I think overall, it's a success. It will never go completely away, but we're on top of things. Next slide, please. And then, as you may know, we have I can say, humongous capital investment program. And we're making, and although most of it is to be delivered in 2026, 2027, a lot of activities already going on to make sure that we actually reach the destination, that we can operate the services in future as we have envisaged. So when it comes to OMC 1, we've started a demolition before we can do the upgrade to accommodate the new 5-car trains and the expansion. OMC Operation Control Center 2, we've started early building works, particularly around the retaining wall, and we've now agreed on the 30% design, and it's all on track. We've continued with our escalator replacement. OMC 4, also in the 30% design phase, and we seem to be fully funded to make this a site that is fully functional and operational. So it's exciting too. And obviously, we're heavily involved with the expansion of the Surrey Langley service and the future requirements for an OMC 5. So lots to do. In total, we have about 70 projects, of which 10 feasibility studies, 19 in design phase studies, and 40 projects that are actually being implemented. So it's a massive package of work, and I think we can all be proud of what we've been doing. Next slide, please. And then June, the first week of June was our Triple Crown Week. During our Triple Crown Week, we tried to do something new. We tried to have 100% on-time performance, 100% punctuality, 100% service delivery, and 100% zero harm. And why this triple? Well, firstly, for me, it was something that to get people come together behind one single goal, and that's performance and teamwork. Those are our values. And having a challenge for 1 week really strengthens those values of teamwork and performance. It was also a chance to try something new. So often we say, well, we can't do it because, you know, it might go wrong. And for me, this was the opportunity to try something new, be innovative, and give people a chance to do something special or to do something differently. And I think we had more than 40 different initiatives, small ones around zero harm, and the way we pick orders from stores, to larger ones where we had teams out to be ready in case something would happen. I had teams timing each other to make sure that if a train failed, that we could be on the move again within 1 minute. I had people coming in early, and some said that they would actually clean trains because they didn't want to call the janitor and lose time that way. So a great spirit, great initiative. So what's the result? Next slide, please. So the result is that we had no incidents that week. So everybody went home safely and uninjured. So that's a great success. Our best day for SkyTrain was 100% service delivery, 100% zero harm, and 99.1% on-time performance. I think that's a brilliant score. It's not yet quite 100%, but remember, we also try to do new things. And sometimes it doesn't always work out. We had 4 days with 100% service delivery and 100% zero harm. And then West Coast Express had 3 full days where they actually achieved the Triple Crown. So it's a great success. But above all of this, we have a lot of data. We know what we invested. We know what we did. We have lots of initiatives. So now we can do this correlation analysis to see what works best if we want to keep improving performance. So overall, I think this is a great success. And It's the start of a tradition, and next year we'll do it again and see if we can do better than that. Next slide, please. And then finally, my big thanks to Gigi. I think it was brilliant to have you in the role in the last few months. I really enjoyed myself, and I think we achieved great things, and I think we're well on our way to reopen the network, and it was my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, board.
Thank you, Michelle, for that report, and that is exciting, and I hope that the Triple Crown Challenge does come back next year and ongoing years. So a couple of questions for you. Start with Lorraine.
I have a few more comments than questions, Michelle. I thought that the video that you showed in the AGM was a really good one for us to see, because many of us don't see what you're doing from a cleanliness perspective. So I really appreciated seeing that piece in the AGM. And I thought all the signage boards, et cetera, all the new improvements that you've done for customer usability around the system was very positive. And I also noticed, I don't think as long as I've been around that I've seen a SkyTrain attendant rating of 9.1 out of 10. So I just want to acknowledge that great success, because that continues to go up each and every time we see these stats. My main comment is around the grinding and the timing that you've shifted to. And I assume that, when the grinding is going on, it's not that enjoyable for people near the system. But I would expect that now that the summer's here and the warmer weather's here and people want to have their windows open, that this is going to be a big positive impact for people that live near the system. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for being creative about, why did we always do it in the fall and why didn't we move it to the spring and late winter? So yeah, kudos.
Thank you, Lorraine. And it always takes about 2 weeks after grinding, it takes about 2 weeks before everything settles down. Also, what we have initiated is to actually send people a letter in that area and advise them that grinding will take place, so that they're now prepared for when it's going to happen and that they might experience noise pollution.
Okay, Harj.
Thanks, Tony. Michelle, I just wanted to commend you on a great report, and particularly on the leadership aspects that you're focused on, and most importantly, the safety aspects. I'm a big proponent of the safety initiatives that you've taken, and I hope you continue along with those and have great success on that safety, the zero harm, and I hope that that's something that we can carry out throughout the whole enterprise. So thank you very much for those.
Thank you, Harj.
Thank you, Harj. Murray?
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. It was a great report, and I appreciate the enthusiasm that your tone of voice generates. I really see great things ahead for you and the team at BCRTC based on the things that you're doing, the way that you're generating excitement, and your commitment to a just culture. I think that will serve the company very well. I wanted to ask you about, you'd mentioned that one of the causes of the delays on SkyTrain were the doors. And I realized that, doors are opening and closing every second of every day. I'm wondering, in terms of our asset management system, do you think we're doing enough in relation to ensuring that the doors are being properly maintained in light of what you reported on as a cause of delay?
That's multiple. So doors are constantly on our radar, right? Because it's probably one of the most vulnerable parts of a train, because they not only do they open and close very often, but it's also the part that actually engages with our staff, with our customers. So people sometimes keep them open or force them open just to pop into trains. So that makes it difficult. We have a door team focusing on doors only. And EAM will definitely help identify doors and door problems. So we're doing all these aspects, but it's always going to be a challenge. I haven't found a silver bullet yet for preventing door problems. The only thing we can do is what we always try to do is see if we can find small steps that will lead to a gradual improvement.
The reason I raise it is, we're buying 204 new cars. Whole bunch of new doors attached to those cars, and whether or not there's been a lot of dialogue with the service team about how can doors be modified to make them more reliable. I'm sure you're doing that, but I certainly would see that as being an important step in the right direction to eliminating or reducing the number of door problems we experience by ensuring that the designs represent, I guess, the elimination of those factors that may be causing problems if it's possible.
Yeah, so there's lots of different kinds of doors. Unfortunately, we have chosen to go for the safest possible door that's there on the market. So that makes it also a little bit more complicated. But what I can do is see if there's a difference between the different Mark 1, 2, and 3 trains and let you know about it. I can't honestly say at this moment if there's a big difference, but there might be, and we'll investigate.
Yeah. Well, especially in light of our climate with winter conditions also adding to the complications, freezing and thawing and things like that. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate the report. It was very good.
Great. Thank you, Marie. Marcella?
Well, thank you, Tony. Michelle, thank you for not just your report, but as was mentioned, your enthusiasm. It's always appreciated. And also I commend you and your whole team for not just providing service, but continuing to make the changes, improvements day by day, and not just sitting still because it's COVID and just providing service. So thank you for that. I do have a question about your Triple Crown, which I know it's a great way to make it fun. Are you expecting with that challenge that overall you will see your numbers improve on both performance and safety? That would just sort of a Kickstarter, even, you hope you do it again, but would we expect to see all of the stats improve?
That's definitely my intention, Marcella, to get those stats improved. So I expect two things. Firstly, we invested a little bit more in the months before we had this week. Maybe we gold-plated it a little bit in some areas just to see what would happen, right? We didn't spend a lot of money, but just a little bit more attention and maybe a little bit more overtime. Right. And hopefully that has a long-term impact on the next few weeks. And my performance team is now on it to compare what we've invested, what the actual outcome was, and if it has an impact on our overall performance. Okay. And if it does, it's great. If it doesn't, then we need to scratch our heads and try and find out why it didn't have a lasting impact. And that's information in itself too, because it gives us a new opportunity to improve. So no matter how or no matter what, I do expect further improvements.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that.
Thanks, Marcella. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Michelle, thank you for your report. I really appreciate the focus that you've brought to the people, the culture, and the safety, as others have before me have indicated. My question is actually around your completion or prospective completion of the McNeil recommendations, and noting that you've got the communications component underway, and that you've got the one remaining OMC1 power system upgrade to go. I just wondered if you could give us a little bit of color into how customers are likely to perceive that. Is it mainly an improvement in redundancy and improvement in operations, or are there likely to be any other indicators for the public and customers in that upgrade?
Thank you, Karen. We're doing there's two things. There's two aspects to this. Firstly, you're right. So the customer information displays have now been installed, and I think they're a great improvement to what people were used to. They're more readable. They give on a real-time, real arrival time forecast. They're very clear and offer lots more opportunity than we used to have. So I think that will overall improve the customer experience. And for some, it will be a new display because we finished this program partly thanks to COVID and our access to the different stations. That's one. The power upgrade is a redundancy one. So that should improve future power cuts in some way, but that's always very irregular. The key thing that we're doing now is to review, and then we've basically completed all 14 recommendations from the McNeil report. The key thing that we have planned to do or have started doing is to see if we are still living to the spirit of that report. Because on the one hand, you have all these different actions, and you can tick them off, and you can tick the box and say, well, we've completed it, now we're good. But I've asked to go a step further and say, well, do we still live up to the spirit of what was intended to at the time? And because ticking boxes is not good enough if you forget about it, right? Yeah. So that's now the next step, and we'll come up. I'm sure we'll come back to the board to see, well, you know, this is what we've done. We've completed it now, but we're also continuing what was supposed to be a change to the organization, really.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Michelle. Appreciate it.
Okay, Michelle. Well, listen, thank you very much for your report. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report from Mike McDaniel, President, General Manager of the Coast Mountain Bus Company. So, Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Ms. Chen Kuo, and members of the public listening today. I'm happy to bring the President's report to you from Coast Mountain Bus Company. We'll move on to the next slide, please. So you have it there, the agenda, just briefly to go through it. I'll have an update on COVID-19, Handy Dart update. I'm going to walk the board through 3 different performance slides, first and foremost on safety, then on operations, and then about our people, our team. A capital update, and then last but not least, kind of a pretty neat story around equity, diversity, and inclusion that I'll tell you at the end of my presentation. So next slide, please. So as I've mentioned before, this seems like a long time ago. It really wasn't. But as part of BC's rollout to vaccinations, our employees at Coast Mountain Bus Company were included in prioritization in a couple of different programs. I wanted to just speak to that for a minute. First was our workers at Burnaby Transit Center and Surrey Transit Center back in April. This was an all hands on deck exercise. Our managers and supervisors actually scheduled more than 1,500 of our staff into vaccination appointments over the period of April 13th to 18th. And they did such a great job at it. We had 0 impacts to our service in those 2 service areas. So kudos to the team for doing that very long weekend that it ended up being for them to do all that work, and very much appreciated. The 2 other programs were when Vancouver Coastal Health and Fraser Health included the rest of transit workers into the prioritization. This was done a bit differently. Each staff member scheduled their own time through the provincial website, and they did it so well that we also had little to none impacts to service across the entire service area for the first shots for our staff. So that was a great feat. It does seem like a long time ago. It of course wasn't, but it was great to get the first shots into all of our staff after a long period of waiting for that. So moving from that to some transportation to vaccination appointments, we've worked with, of course, TransLink, West Van Transit, First Transit, on a variety of programs to help people get to their vaccination appointments. This has been a big push. And actually in other areas we're working on right now with Fraser Health, a potential for using our buses as mobile vaccination centers. That is in the works still, not yet launched, but we're happy to take part in everything we can to help this continued push, which is so important to this region. Next slide, please. So moving just for some updates operationally on Handy Dart. This has been fairly stable over the last number of months, and it was for Q1 of 2021 as well, but our trips are about 39% of what pre-pandemic levels were. Given that there wasn't as much demand, we were able to maximize physical distancing. And as you see there on the slide, 95% of all trips were delivered with 2 or fewer customers on the vehicle. Again, because we had a little bit more supply on the roads, we were able to do some more things. Partnering with 4 different community groups in the city of Vancouver, we were able to deliver food deliveries to Handy Dart and non-Handy Dart customers over a period of a few months. And then, of course, you see there more than 1,100 trips to vaccination appointments, as referenced on the past slide. Next slide, please. So this, I'm going to move into a couple of performance slides. First and foremost is safety. You see the charts up here. I brought these to this meeting before. The one on the left is WorkSafe BC claims submitted. The one on the right is those claims accepted by WorkSafe. What you see, of course, for Q1 for a 5-year trend from 2017 to 2021 is for the most part a declining trend, of course, ups and downs here and there. But from 2020 to 2021, Q1, we have seen a downward trend, and that's a good sign. Unfortunately, excuse me, unfortunately, we have had times where our lost days actually have gone up. And this is because the duration of our absences are actually increasing. We think what's happening across the COVID-19 pandemic is that because of delays in either getting to doctors or getting to visits that they need to be able to get well and come back, those are stretching the time. We also know that mental health claims are rising as a proportion. They now are 1/3 of our claims submitted. And that is why our task force that we formed in late 2020 is working internally as well as with WorkSafe on all of these issues. It's very complex. One of the things I can tell you is that 3 of the categories that I guess drive some of these claims are things like overexertion, motor vehicle incidents, and falls. We take that analysis and we work on training programs and communication to our staff to try to minimize those, and we'll continue to do that. Next slide, please. So this is on customer service, and what you see in the bars, the orange bars, is that we have customer service ratings that come out of TransLink's research and analytics team quarterly. For the past number of years, we've been pretty steady around 7.9 out of 10. What we've seen through the pandemic, though, is as we've moved into that, we actually have increased. These are actually record-breaking numbers, 8.2 on average for 2020. We actually finished 2020 at 8.3, but on average it was 8.2. And in Q1 of 2021, we've actually gone up to 8.4. What you also see on the slide, the line is showing our on-time performance. And our on-time performance, of course, because we haven't been as busy, but we've kept service on the roads for those that need it, our on-time performance has gone up. It's from around 80 to 81% up to around 85 to 86%. We know this. We know this from our customers. They want service that is frequent and is reliable and on time. So we're not surprised at this, but we're pleased by the results, and it's been our team that's made sure that we're able to do this. And we're going to watch this as we go forward over the next number of months as demand recovers and as ridership increases. So we will do our best to keep our on-time performance as well as we can, because we know that it drives customer experience. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite slide of today. This is about our people. It's about our team. And one of the things that makes CNBC great is our people. And it is the length of time that our employees work for this great organization. You see it on your slide there. 31 individuals have 40 years or more service here at Coast Mountain Bus Company. 229 have 30 to 39 years. 781 have 20 to 29 years of service. You see the other numbers on the slide. When you have 18% of your employee base have more than 20 years or more experience, you have an immense amount of knowledge and you have an immense amount of expertise. And we sure needed that expertise over this last year of the pandemic, a year plus. And in fact, we actually have 2 employees that are celebrating 50 and 51 years of service. It's a lifetime. People have dedicated an entire lifetime to working at this organization. And it is something that makes this place extra special. We, of course, as mentioned earlier on in the AGM, Gigi mentioned this, we lost 2 of our staff this year from COVID-19. And it continues to break our hearts that that's happened. We continue to support the families of those that we lost and the colleagues that were close to them. But it is what makes us special is our people. And that's why this is my favorite slide. Next slide, please. Now, from our people to our to our capital programs that, of course, support our people. And this is OTAP, on-time performance, oh my gosh, what does that stand for? OTAP, I'll just move on. It is a program that has a variety of projects in it. TCOM renovation is the first one. And these are programs that are going to help with our safety and security of our staff. Our TCOM renovation, this is our nerve center. And this is where all the communication comes in and goes out from. They're going to literally get a renovation that will help them have a better view into what's happening in the system every day, every minute of the day and night. So that's a good sign. Radio replacement is also happening. This is going to upgrade all the radios in our system. So the people in our field can talk to TCOM, TCOM can talk to them. Where we have gaps today, we will not have gaps tomorrow. Our cameras on our fleet are being replaced. And these are so important for the safety of our staff and our customers, because we review these extensively after incidents on our system. And unfortunately, we have incidents on our system every single day. This program does have funding under PTIF funding, and I'm happy to report that it is currently on budget and actually ahead of schedule, estimated to be complete by Q4 of 2022. Next slide, please. And this is the neat story I was telling you about. This is been driven by our EDI task force members from CNBC, and they partnered with a variety of groups, TransLink Human Resources, CNBC Maintenance, and of course, the Immigrant Services Society of BC. And this was a session, a virtual session. Obviously, you see the screenshot there of 76 newcomers to Canada. Newcomers that had diverse backgrounds in engineering, computer science, business, education, and they were able to sit with our teams and talk about skill development, talk about interview skills, talk about career paths that we have at Coast Mountain Bus Company. It was a great first kick that we have done at this. It was something that the attendees really liked, but surprisingly, it was something that the staff that participated in this really loved. They still talk about it. We were really great. It was really great to start this, and kudos to our EDI task force members who drove this forward. And we look forward to participating in things like this in the future. Next slide, please. That is the end of my presentation. I did also want to say thank you to Gigi. If there was ever a time where we needed stability in our leadership, if we needed a grounded leader to transition us from our past CEO to our future CEO, it was this period of time of great uncertainty. And Gigi, on behalf of everybody at CNBC, thank you for bringing exactly what we needed in the time period we needed it. And members of the board, that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. A few questions for you. I'll start with Larry.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for your report, as complete as always, well presented. I want to go back to a question I talked to you about. We talked about it at the last public meeting, and that's the transit operator assaults. And I noticed the performance on that has been decently good, but flat. You've done training, you've done other things, and I get the numbers, how they are skewed as a result of COVID, but it's a per unit, it's a little bit higher than it was before. Could you just tell us what you're doing on that, and do you have any other things in mind to help to bring this down so that we can get close to zero? You know, I like these close to zero targets that we're trying for nowadays. And can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Larry. And it's a great question. It's what occupies a lot of our time at Coast Mountain, because it is an inherent challenge in bus service. It is around. And so we work with our peers as well in BC, as well as around the world. So this is something that everybody talks about a lot. Now, one of the things we did discover during the pandemic, because we had to put up these temporary barriers, is that we've seen some really strong signals that those are helping. The challenge we have, of course, is we did it very quickly. We did it in a temporary nature. They weren't meant as physical protection per se. It was really related to the pandemic. So our team has been working for the last few months to actually see if we can replace those vinyl barriers with hard barriers as a 1-for-1. And we're almost there. We haven't quite finished it, but we are working on it very diligently, because we may have a situation where we can pivot from the end of a pandemic and a temporary barrier in nature to something that is more permanent and more targeted at more physical safety. Over and above the barriers, we always continue to do work with making sure that our transit security officers are out assisting our operators, that our training, which of course our one-day training that launched this last year, which I've told the board about before, has a violent incident prevention aspect to it. And we had a lot of gains from that a couple of years ago when we trained everybody on that. So there's a lot of things we're doing from training to kind of the engineering side, and we won't stop. Our goal is zero. Our goal isn't what we did last year or a little bit better, it is zero, but it is a journey, and we will continue on. It's very important to us.
Yeah, I think it is. And particularly if you take that EDI perspective, you know, young people, women, people of different cultural groups that we know are underrepresented in our system, and we're trying to fix that. If we can take this out of the equation, I think it takes away a barrier that would just stop people from being inclined to want to join us as employees. What's really good is that we have such a good positive culture among the employees. That I think draws people in, but I think people are still hesitant about that issue of safety. And if we can just bring that close to zero, that'll put that, you know, away, and we can make some strides in those fronts.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Andy?
Thank you, and thanks for the report, Mike. Mike, I just want to ask about something in your written report on the collision avoidance systems pilot project. I know in your report that you said it's finalized and the data is being collated. I'm just wondering if you have a sense when we may see that, and sort of speculating forward, if that is found to be something useful, whether there's something that we can then use as a KPI around that as we, as the enterprise now looking towards Vision Zero for the future.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough question to answer right now, Andy, but I can speak to it a little bit because we don't have the final report. It's due actually, I think, in about a month. We couldn't get it done for this meeting, just given the extension we did for the Mobileye system. But you know, we've had mixed reviews. We obviously did consult with our drivers, our union. Some really like it, some really don't. And of course, there's different types of systems. Two are very similar. Sion and Lusrix are very similar, and Mobileye is quite a bit different. But the idea here, I think this is a little bit like anything around safety, is we're continuing to put a focus on it, and we're trying different things. Some of them are not going to work. We don't know if this is an example that will work or an example that won't work yet. But one of the things that we did get out of this this trial, this demo, was all of us focusing on how we can be safer on the roads, and I think that's what will come out in the report as well. But it's too early to tell with the results. But I will say that once we have them, we'll be dissecting whether it's something we do now retroactively and putting systems on fleet that we own right now, or if it's something that we will do going forward in time for new fleet, or a mixture of both. So more to come, I think, at the next meeting. I'm sorry I can't provide more information today to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy. Harj?
Thank you, Tony. Hey, Mike, thank you for the great report. Mike, as we're getting closer to a full opening in the province in the fall, are you anticipating any increase in anxiety with our frontline staff, and what kind of programs do we have in place to sort of help them along and readjust to the increased levels of people on the system?
Yeah, I think the quick answer, Harj, is that we do anticipate this is going to be a massive change for all of us. We're going to have to socialize everybody to, new stages of the new normal as we go forward. And buses going from a capacity ranging between 35 to 60% right now, depending on where you are in the region at what time, going back up to 80 or 90%. That is a big change. And we do anticipate that we will have some apprehension with our staff. Most of the time when we do change, though, we simply focus on good communications. And that's always going to be the case, where our aim will be to do that in advance. So through the summer.
I think Mike just froze.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Yep, we can.
Oh, okay. All right.
Might be Tony that froze.
I think it's Tony that froze. So we are focused on making sure we can communicate to our teams about those and just be there to support that change as it comes. We do think, here's the good sign. I think it's going to be a bit gradual throughout the summer, and then maybe take a little bit of a leap forward in September and then be gradual again. So we'll be there to communicate with our staff and support our staff along the way.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm just a little concerned that communication is great, but it may not be be enough in this instance, especially if there is a large shift in September. I understand what you're saying with the gradual increases over the summer. There is going to be a bit of a bump in September and whatever that looks like. And so I just, just put it out there that maybe it's something that we need to think about across the system.
Thanks, Harj. We will. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Harj. Lorraine?
Thank you very much. And thank you for the report, Mike. I have two things from your report that I wanted to ask you about. One was about the electric safety program that now with us moving more towards electric buses. Would I assume, or is my assumption correct, that because we have the trolley buses, that we have a more aware workforce around all the electrical issues that are going to come our way from a safety perspective?
We do. I think that's a good assumption. We do have a leg up. I think I would describe it as a leg up. What we don't have is we don't have that decentralized across all of our depots. Trolley overhead is a fairly segregated part of our company. The rest of the garages are, again, different because they don't have, at this point in time anyways, they don't have high voltage electric on the buses. Now, that said, a number of our hybrid buses that have come have had more of a component of that. Obviously, our demo buses that we're doing with the Qtronic trial on the battery electrics have had that. So we're using the learnings that we've had from trolley overhead, and we've been applying them to that. We do have a long way to go because we obviously have very high voltage chargers and charging infrastructure that really is still new to us, and we'll have a lot more of it as we go forward in time. So we're leveraging the learning, but we have a lot of learning to do as well.
Great. I just have one more question. And this is around the fresh air vents, the Flettner vents that you're putting in the Handy Dart. I'm wondering if they're also going into the conventional buses or some other kind of air vents, because everybody's concerned about the virus and fresh air, et cetera. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, at this point in time, no, and I'll just explain that. The difference in the Handy Dart vehicles that we found was that different than the other transit vehicles on our conventional system, the doors open up a lot on our conventional system. We're going from stop to stop, opening the doors. There's a lot of ventilation coming in. When we did all of the fresh air testing, what we found was that the Handy Dart vehicles scored the lowest, essentially, and needed to be retrofit because of not just the nature of the vehicle, but the way it operates. So the Flettner vents on those vehicles ended up creating this continuous flow of fresh air, whereas the conventional system inherently has that because of the way it operates and the doors opening every few minutes throughout the entire run. So at this point in time, no, but we are continuing to look at all of the things we should around windows being opened, fresh air vents being done, all of those things to make sure we do have as much ventilation on all parts of our fleet, from buses to sea buses.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Mike, for your report. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda now, which is to hear from our Chief Officer, Dave Jones. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and the rest of the board, and thanks to Gigi and the other senior staff here today. First of all, just make mention that, as we all know, we're coming through COVID and we're coming towards the end of it, and certainly want to appreciate all the work that's been done by transit staff and the police members in particular, those who have been in a role where they've had to go out each and every day and come to work and still, I want to say, maintain the service that they've been doing throughout the year. It's been a busy year. As many of you may have known, we also started our strategic planning probably over a year ago. And since then, it's been delayed a bit, but we're back on track to have a strategic plan finished by the end of this year. And I want to thank both the boards and the community groups and the staff that have participated to give us both that internal and external look at what we're doing. So next slide. So as one of the things that has obviously been very present over the last year has been the COVID safety and issues such as mask compliance. We started, of course, with regulations that were put in place and recommendations that came in terms of voluntary mask compliance, which then later changed to public health orders and other restrictions, including isolation when people return from travels. And of course, we know that TransLink and transit serviced areas such as the YVR airport, which had us in the early stages, having to be on the watch and providing assistance for people that were required to quarantine. As more and more people became used to it, we saw a decline in the number of issues that we had to address with mask compliance. Our process right from the very beginning, though, was to do it through an educational approach of, I want to say, of cautioning people, advising them of the rules, the regulations, or the health orders, and getting them to educate each other, which included us providing masks if when in suitable places, or if someone simply didn't know or wasn't aware of it. That did transition into an enforcement type approach. However, recently we've seen now with the increase in both vaccinations and I would say the public's full awareness of what's happening, even though we move towards hopefully a conclusion to the pandemic, is that the issues of enforcement have dropped off significantly. Next slide. So you saw this as part of the AGM here. One of the things that was planned for and started over a year ago was a program called the Blue Eagle Community Cadets. The Blue Eagle Community Cadets is a program that we're very proud of to sponsor. We've had good sponsorship from TransLink, from the province of British Columbia, and the Vancouver Police Department in it. And this is a program that is aimed for kids 11 to 15, Indigenous youth in particular, although anybody is welcome to join it. And when we talk about it, we target what's called an urbanized Indigenous youth. And for some people, when they've asked about that, the issue urbanized really is we have Indigenous First Nations people who come to the Lower Mainland area and they're no longer in contact with their, we'd call their home base or their home systems of support. And sometimes down here, we find out that they need something else or need something extra, and they've been put into perhaps even a vulnerable situation. Our program, which is led by Constable Kurt Rattray, who is Indigenous himself, and Sergeant Cheryl Simpkin, gets together once a week and deals with the youth. And it's about getting them also in touch with their culture. At times, as you'll see as part of the picture there, one was a drum making exercise where we bring in other people who are engaged in the First Nations Indigenous cultures. But it isn't our only community-based programs that we've expanded upon in the last year. Even though it was during a COVID time frame, hats off to Constable Julian Poncion. If you haven't seen it as of yet, he's been able to create a waterfront community police office down at Waterfront Office, obviously. And with that, though, he has now been able to recruit and engage volunteers who go out on the system. So in addition to the work that we're doing, in addition to the work that STAs are doing, in addition to the work that other staff are doing throughout the system, we now have these volunteers who do community efforts on behalf of the transit police and TransLink itself. And, you know, they've become a very valuable asset. In fact, Julian had so many of them, he actually had to shut off the application process in terms of it. We also have had throughout the last year a greater amount of outreach to vulnerable people and vulnerable individuals. Constable Shipley, who is very much involved with this, who leads kind of our efforts when it comes to people who find themselves suffering from homelessness or addiction in that area, in those areas. There's been a greater need for it, as some people found that housing was harder to find, or that food sources, places of support had diminished during the initial stages of COVID, that Constable Shipley, along with others, would gather up essential supplies during the cold weather, such as socks, blankets, and food donations, so that we could, when we're traveling throughout the system, be able to assist those in need. And part of one of our goals is to reduce the risk of harm that people may face within the situation they're in. So in other words, whether they be homeless, whether it be an addiction issue, or whether it be a mental health issue, the idea was to assist them within their situation to ensure that the risk of them becoming harmed either through themselves or others was reduced. And Constable Shipley has done a great job of that. Next slide. Leading us into the towards the end of or beginning of COVID, it started, and perhaps we saw last year in certain communities, as we service 22 different communities, there was a rise in reported anti-hate directed towards some ethnicities. And in particular, there was an anti-Asian hate sentiment that was perpetrated by some individuals. So we've taken a role not only with ourselves, but our other community policing and partner agencies, as we look towards what we'll call as a safe return to transit. We want individuals to know, so we're working with both community groups in the Asian communities and the Muslim communities, and several other ethnic groups, to make sure that they understand how transit is safe, and that if something does happen, what steps they can do to make sure that they report it. We've been going out, as you can see, we have been creating literature in various different languages, becoming very accessible at some of our major transit hubs. And then again, as I've indicated, we'll be working with universities and other major community groups to ensure that the messaging gets out as to, with one of the biggest steps being the reporting of anything that really happens that they find themselves unsure, unsafe of. As was mentioned in one of the prior reports there, you know, the transit system has an extensive amount of audio video that allows us, in a high percentage of cases when something's been reported, that we are able to identify the individuals involved and then address it in an appropriate manner. I do want to note, though, that we did, within the transit system itself for last year, see a 42% drop in the number of harassment, hate-related incidents that were reported to ourselves. Next slide. So part of the efforts, obviously being, you know, policing throughout the region, is that we do get involved with our jurisdictional partners and in trends that are occurring along the I guess throughout the communities and within, I guess, in and around the transit system itself. I don't want to ever forget at this point in time that there is still an ongoing opioid crisis that has been going on for 5 years now. There's still a significant loss of individuals who have lost their lives during this time frame, more than what we've seen on an annual average than what we see with COVID. And last year, and of course going into this year, we continue to equip our members with items such as naloxone and the ability to provide first aid in the initial stages to those who they find that may be in medical distress due to the use of an opioid drug. And our members have continued into this year. And while last year we saw a 60% increase in the number of naloxone administrations, and we'll call them naloxone saves last year, our numbers are still up for this year. Part of this slide just goes to show you, we know that we are involved, or recently that there were issues that surrounded gang activity, in particular shootings. There have been some very high profile locations such as YVR, malls, parks, and it became a bit more brazen. Our commitment to the people who use the system isn't just on the system. We like to say we're helping you, keeping you safe before, during, and after your journey. So we've combined with several other police agencies to provide support to them in ensuring that as a regional issue that we're addressing it. This focus has included us working with the Vancouver Police Department Gang Crime Unit, the regional intel centers, assisting with some of the homicides that have occurred. And of course, again, I'll talk to the very valuable assets of video in and around our systems. As some of the activities we look at is to see what people, or look what individuals' travels were both before the events occurred and after the events occurred. Next slide. And one of the things that we've talked about over the last while is a bit of focusing and specializing as to how we address problems or issues around the system. I may have indicated before that 80% of what policing does in general, and I'm talking about throughout the country, has nothing to do with what we call traditional crime. A lot of it does with, we say, are things such as mental health issues, homelessness, addictions, which are not criminal activities, but they're issues that the police have become involved with throughout the country in terms of resolving concerns and providing assistance to those individuals in that situation. We have looked recently, and we started up with a trial period on what we'll call as a crime suppression team. This is a group of individuals who really focuses on that intel-led policing side. It is designed to, identify and target, we'll call it more prolific individuals, prolific offenders who may exist or cause issues throughout the system. So while we did a lot of focus, and I talked earlier about prevention activities and trying to help those in vulnerable situations and working with youth, there is an enforcement component to what we need to be involved with. And a lot of this team does, though, it works with the jurisdictional police along the system to identify those prolific offenders who may be using transit or committing crimes in relation to transit. And we then focus on the hotspot. So a bit of it is we try to work as part of everything from providing that community support all the way up to an enforcement angle. And this team actually started with a project that was on the North Shore from up in North Vancouver, which you wouldn't have thought. People think that we have a lot to do up there, but it was to deal with property crime issues that were associated with property offenses occurring by people who are either using transit to come into the area and then leave on transit, which was one of the main key aspects of it. And it was quite successful. Hats off to the members on their second day after the team was approved and put out there. You may have seen the media release that regarded them actually arresting and seizing a handgun off unknown gang member who was out near the Metrotown station while they were in the Metrotown area. Next slide. So this shows us a picture of our 3 latest recruits who went into the Justice Institute for training. The Police Academy, it's the first time we've ever submitted a class that was only female, 3 female members who went in. EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, is a very important issue to us as it is for a lot of other individuals. How we hire, who we hire, how we treat each other, how we react to others, how we treat others that we work with or we work for in terms of being out there in the community. It was noted in a Vancouver Sun article last year or just early this year that the Transit Police is the most diverse police agency in the province of BC based on percentages, which is something that I don't think you rest upon, but it does show that the individuals who are attracted to this type of work and that come from a very diverse and wide-ranging background. And we've been very happy and pleased with the hires we have to date. Next slide. So the next one basically is just in conclusion of this. I would note that as we indicated in prior submissions or within the written report, while we saw transit ridership drop, our calls for service didn't drop a corresponding percentage, which was not surprising, as we said in the past. The vast majority of individuals who use transit services do so for a very valid reason, whether it be school, entertainment, work, or something else. And there is, as in most or every community, there's always some form of disruption at some point or some activities that do need the attention of individuals such as the police. But what COVID did give us was that opportunity to look at some of the different ways of doing things and approaches to how we could support not only ourselves, but our jurisdictional police officers. And last of all, I also, like everyone else, want to thank Gigi Chen-Kuo for her work over the past while with Kevin #1 leaving. In terms of it, I think that the board's decision and her stepping up to the plate here provided a certain continuity of services and information and leadership throughout what was a very unique and period of time, but it didn't cause any hesitations or hiccups, and I've certainly appreciated her support as she both served in that role and on the TSML board. So with that, that's my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dave, for that report. Do have some folks who have questions for you. I'll start with Lorraine.
Thank you, Chief Jones. Good report as always. I'm really interested in your community policing center, the waterfront center that started up. And I'm curious about the volunteers and whether it's something that they're using as an opportunity to see if this is a career that they're interested in. Are they, kind of the age demographics? Is this kind of a way to build up interest in this field? And then I'm also curious about whether you're contemplating trying to set this up in other areas around our system.
So thank you very much. So yes, the majority of volunteers who do come in are looking to gain some experience in and around policing or public safety and get into that career or field. There are some who are just what I would call as volunteers who just do it because they enjoy doing it. They feel a commitment to come, and offer something to the communities that they live or work in. So the biggest one is, and it does become a bit of a recruitment tool for us in terms of exposing them not only to just the type of policing we do, but also the people who do the job and who they would be able to work with. In this case, it's Constable Julian Poncion, who's a very, very active and well known within the Vancouver and the waterfront area or the Vancouver community. And he actually answered that exact question the other day about why people volunteer. He also had the question, and I would say to you is, it is something that we will look at as we go. The issue that really comes with it is it does take a resource, like resourcing internally, because when you've got volunteers, you have to make sure that you're providing them meaningful stuff to do. You're helping schedule them, train them, and do that. So there is a lot of work that goes into it. However, with the success, this was our first pilot of doing it ourselves. With the success that's occurring here, I could see that there will be I would say, an opportunity to expand this in the right places at the right time.
Great. Thanks, Lorraine. Sarah?
Thanks, Tony. Great report. I'm always fascinated by the diversity of the programs that your team is involved in. And I'm also, thanking you for bringing up the opioid crisis that has only seen to get worse in the past year. And I wanted you to speak about how some of your programs, while your officers are all trained in addressing overdoses with naloxone, I think a lot of your programs also are aimed at prevention of overdoses and the circumstances to get people into the position where they might be overdosing. So how do you think of those two things together?
Yeah, so what I didn't cover directly in there is we have this part of the where we find Julian's team and the neighborhood police officers, the Indigenous programs. It's called the community engagement team, and we have that where we're in contact or connection with specialized services with in the various communities that we may be able to make a referral to or get somebody into for assistance. We also, and even though I'll look at what Kirk and Cheryl do, the Blue Eagle Cadet program is but one side of it. Like Kirk and Cheryl will review, we call, say, all Indigenous files where we may deal with Indigenous youth. They'll go out and meet the kids, they'll meet the families. We try to see what services we can offer, and including even this program of the Blue Eagle Cadets to get kids and them out to it. So like anything, that being there in the moment to save a life or to provide assistance is a very key aspect. But we also try to recognize the ones that we are willing to get assistance, or the ones that we feel may need assistance because we're interacting with them so much, is that we direct them towards the community engagement team that will then, I will say, almost triage them to see how we can interact with them and introduce them to other programs or supports within the communities that they're finding themselves in, to try and work on that prevention side of it and let them know it exists. I would say though, there's a shortage in the number of services or service providers that everyone can access, because we're not the only group who's trying to do that. And that is probably the biggest challenge. And you may have heard this before from police agencies, is this idea of treatment on demand.
Yeah.
We face this issue where somebody says, I'm looking for treatment and I'm ready to go, but there's a 6-month wait to get them into it. That becomes a challenge.
Thank you. And thank you for all your efforts.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Dave, thank you very much for your report. Appreciate that. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the chair reports from the various committees. Sarah, we're going to start with you and the Audit and Finance Committee.
Great, thank you, Tony. For those that attended the annual general meeting today, there was an excellent report by Chris Stakar on our last year's financials and how we're managing going forward. The team has done an excellent job in dealing with the pandemic and the reduction in revenue, and managing our debt, in managing our expenses. And this is Chris and her team, but the whole enterprise has done a tremendous job in really reacting quickly and being able to keep us in the great position that we are today. And the province has come in, of course, as Chris noted, and really helped out. So I think everyone at TransLink and all the users of TransLink are highly appreciative of that. So we did spend time, of course, in our meeting talking about the forecast and looking at future ridership and how that's going to affect our finances this year and beyond. We're going to hear more about that. We also endorsed the Q1 financial and performance report for release, so that is available for people to read at on their own time. Our agenda was quite lengthy. Other highlights of note was a review of the enterprise resource planning program and the progress and forecast for that, the systems upgrades required for that, as well as budget requirements. We talked about the cybersecurity incident as well as the actions that are being taken around that. We had an overall information technology update. We cover safety of the enterprise in our committee. And as you've heard today from Michelle and Mike, there has been tremendous progress being made in both CNBC and BCRTC, which we applaud. And as Mike said, you know, it's not just one front. They're trying many different fronts, and that's what it takes to change a culture. And both organizations are starting to see the outcome of their efforts. So we really appreciate that. On the internal audit, we had a report from our internal auditor, Tony Pollard, on some of the continuous improvement reports, as well for his plan for the remainder of 2021. I think that covers the highlights if anyone has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I don't see any questions, so we'll move on to the next update from Larry and the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee report.
Well, thank you, Chair. Since the last public meeting on March 25th, we've had one meeting in early June, quite a long agenda. Many of the items were coming through us to make it to today's agenda of the board. And then the rest of the items were really updates and continuing input on work that is ongoing by the team. It was a long meeting. I think we had over 400 or 500 pages to read leading into it. And it was a fascinating meeting. We covered the last round of engagement on Transport 2050, where there was over 5,000 more people that gave us their ideas about that emerging plan, next 30-year plan. And it was a pretty strong and consistent confirmation of the directions and some really good advice also coming out of that on many fronts. And that is setting us up very well to lead into the next round of public engagement. And that is on the agenda today as well. We then had a good, rich discussion about the ridership recovery, both the numbers that we are settling at the moment at around 40% of pre-COVID ridership, but that we're starting to move up. And then a long discussion about a very energetic program that will be coming forward right through to the end of the year to welcome our customers back, to make it fun, to make it interesting and rewarding for them to be on our system. I would say to anyone listening, stay tuned, because there's a lot of great opportunities and fun things that'll be a part of that. We really liked the progress that's been made on Indigenous relations, a new framework of vision statement and principles involving all the 10 First Nations in the region in a constant engagement and discussion with us, government to government, which is a very positive thing indeed. We had an update on the Burnaby Mountain Gondola. We're getting to the place where we're being able to settle on an alignment, which we can then take into a more full business case, but very mindful that we have concerns in the community. Staff talked to us about the various things they're continuing to do to engage with community people to deal with what are true impacts and acknowledged impacts there. We also had an update on the UBC, the extension of the Millennium Line out to UBC. Really completion of the technical analysis, or getting close to it, the options they're dealing with, and further design development. So everyone stay tuned. This is going to be a fascinating unfolding of information as we move forward over the next few months to the end of the year. And then, of course, as I've already said earlier, we spent a long time talking about the Handy-Dart modernization, the registration, and the fare structure. We paralleled what was being done by the Finance Committee on the fare structure, but mostly to be informed, and we spent most of our time on the registration. And then very importantly, even though I'm talking about it at the end of my presentation, was a report out on the SkyTrain noise study. And what's really important here, in addition to what has already been said at the meeting, is that a whole new suite of noise mitigation measures are being tested, have been identified, and are going to be brought into into service over the next few months. And I know there's been continued concerns. I've had personal links with people down in False Creek who have been hearing noise, continuing to hear noise. And I know that has been dealt with. I was so pleased to see the reaction to do that. But also those people can expect more measures coming forward, very nice measures. And as importantly for the future, a noise mitigation set of guidelines for new construction. So as we build more and more around our transit system, the buildings will be built to withstand noise in a much better way. And then, Chair, we had 9 consent items that we also dealt with on a variety of things in the continuing business of TransLink. So that's my report. If there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Larry. I don't see any questions for you, but it sounds like you had a very busy meeting. We'll go next to the Human Resources and Governance Committee. I'm going to provide that report. Our chair, Marcella Zezel, couldn't make it due to a family matter, but essentially we dealt with the future of work, which is kind of interesting because the vast majority of the employees at TransLink are essential frontline workers who their job hasn't changed as a result of the pandemic. But we do have about 1,400 office staff who have been working from home. And we reviewed or are looking at a plan in terms of how we reintegrate those folks back once the provincial government sort of allows us to revisit in terms of coming back into the office. So we got a bit of an update on that program. We also received a report on the Indigenous Relations Framework. So Larry mentioned it, so I'm not going to really go through with that. Other than to say that at the time we received the report, we had consulted with 4 of the 10 First Nations, and I believe we've done 2 others in the meantime. And then that's going to come back to the board once that consultation process has been completed. We also dealt with the board competencies, which is on the agenda later on today. We also got an update on the CEO onboarding and orientation. And I think as Gigi mentioned, our new CEO is coming on July 19th. And we're trying to make sure that his transition is very efficient. And so there's a whole program for him that sort of orientates him to TransLink so they can get off to a running start. And then we spent quite a bit of time talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion in terms of the framework. It's a draft framework that was presented to the board or to the committee for comment. It's actually a 3-year program. So to date, we've actually developed the vision and we've developed the mission and we've established the foundation. And Gigi talked about the speaker series and some of the other work. But really the objective here is to sort of embed EDI into the culture and people practices throughout the organization. And so I think we've got a good start to that. And that consultation process on that program will continue throughout the enterprise with all the involved stakeholders. So that's my brief update on the HR. If there's any questions. Okay, not seeing any. I think we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on our ridership recovery. And I think Steve is going to provide that update.
Actually, Tony, this one is from me and Teresa O'Reilly, our manager of system analytics.
Yeah, sorry, Jeff, I misread the wrong agenda item.
We're going to do forecasting, and then Steve and his team tells us how we're actually going to deliver the services and marketing to make that recovery happen.
Perfect.
So in our ongoing effort to keep you apprised of what's happening out on the system, this is primarily focused on ridership. But we will also speak a bit about our efforts to understand what's happening across the system on the road system, and even in the future looking multimodally at biking and walking as well to understand how we're pursuing our objectives. So Teresa's just going to run you through the latest on this, and then maybe I'll just close with a couple of recent observations. Teresa?
Thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Teresa O'Reilly. I'm the Manager of System Analytics in the Transportation and Planning and Policy Division. So this presentation summarizes the Ridership Recovery Report update report. And as noted, TransLink has been providing safe and reliable transit service for essential travel since the pandemic hit over a year ago. The Safe Restart Agreement is maintaining pre-COVID service levels that our customers are relying on, and TransLink has launched many initiatives and innovations to limit coronavirus transmission on transit. These efforts are supporting customers' confidence in the system. Ridership recovery has been stable since last fall, and so have transit travel patterns. Next slide, please. But ridership is expected to grow now as cases are declining and vaccination rates are rising, as well as BC Restart Plan, which is officially in step 2, and it is certainly welcomed, and we're getting set up for a safe return to normal, which we've talked about previously in the meeting as well. So we're currently updating our forecast, as Jeff just mentioned. This presentation right here is focusing on transit, but we're also looking in on other transportation modes, namely driving as well as cycling. Some factors that are driving transit demand are more optimistic now, such as employment rates and return to workplaces and campuses, as well as more of the social gatherings and the cultural activities we've been so missing. Some uncertainty remains around the amount of work from home, so how many days of work are required to travel in the office, and that lingering apprehension about the virus. So will this trip to work be a transit trip? Next slide, please. At our lowest point in April 2020, 75,000 essential workers were still dependent on transit to get to their jobs. And the recovery we've seen to date has been remarkably stable at 40% of transit 2019 boardings, even through BC's second and third waves. But driving has also been stable, and it has been stable at a much higher rate. So the ridership drops then and rebounds that other regions have experienced are associated with strict lockdown periods, which we've managed to avoid in BC. Next slide, please. We recently launched the 2020 Transit Service Performance Review, and this document details how the network has supported ridership recovery. So transit travel patterns remain remarkably similar to pre-pandemic travel, which means the busiest, fastest routes were still the busiest. And the changes we've seen in travel patterns demonstrate the importance of transit for people making these essential trips. Ridership on routes serving industrial areas recovered to almost 70% of 2019 in different parts of the region. And over 2020, and as we're doing in 2021, we're prioritizing service on routes when and where customers need it most. Next slide, please. In 2020, TransLink retained about 48% of its total 2019 boardings. And this was the second highest retention rate among the 10 busiest Canadian and US urban regions. TransLink remained 4th in per capita boardings and 6th in annual boardings. Next slide, please. Last year, upwards of 218 million boardings, even in this crisis, quite a high number, was almost equal to Seattle's 2019 pre-COVID annual boardings and ahead of Calgary's. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, ridership is forecasted to reach between 70 and 90% of pre-COVID. And as I mentioned earlier, we are updating this current forecast, and we're looking at those factors that are influencing transportation demand in Metro Vancouver, which includes closely watching the BC Restart program. So we'll be producing 3 scenarios, and so that we're still reflecting a range of possible ridership recoveries when we do this coming work. Next slide, please. We understand TransLink's ridership recovery will be shaped by our local context, but just the same, we like to keep a close eye on other regions around the globe to learn from experience elsewhere. So ridership has snapped back to a high of over 83% in Vienna, and other systems like London have already reached a high of 50%. Next slide, please. Maintaining convenient, competitive, and safe service for essential travel has supported high ridership retention and stable recovery so far. Recent market research suggests that customers are considering a return to transit are looking for 3 qualities: fast, frequent service, on-time reliability, and safety cleanliness. So in short, high-quality transit service will be key for ridership rebuilding. Thank you.
So just two other things I'd like to emphasize. It came up earlier. One of the key variables that we're looking at is the work from home element. And right now we're obviously have a wide range that we're monitoring. There are over 500,000 jobs in this region that we know can work from home. And in fact, during the pandemic at some point were. You know, what percentage of those end up working from home for a portion of the week is going to be one of the key indicators of our peak demand and thus our overall demand. Right now, between those three scenarios, the middle of our distribution, we're looking at about on average, people would work from home 1.5 days per week of those jobs that can work from home. Now, some people that'll be a lot less, some will be a lot more. That is going to have implications for the structure of our system, for the structure of our demand, and obviously for the revenue going back forward. To the degree that that diminishes peak hour travel demand, both on the transit system and for driving, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the environment. It's a good thing for travel time savings. It's great for goods movement, for more reliability, and for those that don't have a choice. To the degree that people, because of nervousness around sharing a ride, continue to be in a car for longer, that's a concern that we really want to watch and make sure that we're emphasizing the safety, convenience, and affordability of the transit system. The other thing we'll be watching now as we're in step 2 and then moving into step 3, that should increase overall travel demand in the region. So we'll start to see, you know, how does that translate to ridership? Even last week, we saw a bit of an uptick. We'll see if it's a trend that continues. So hopefully in coming weeks and months, we'll be able to report that we're working towards that, probably somewhere in the realm of 80%, give or take 10, for early 2022. And I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. There are some questions for you, Murray.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Thank you, Jeff. Just the question I have in relation to university students being an important component of our ridership, and universities speculating to open their campuses in September. Is that, you know, we've all kind of learned about this potential to do things remotely over the course of the pandemic. What are the universities doing in relation to classes? Is there a mixed bag of learning opportunities, some remote and some on campus, or are your projections suggesting that anybody that's attending university will be attending classes on campus?
So I think there's two answers to that, two dimensions to that, Murray. One is, you know, for this fall, you know, what are we anticipating? And within our scenarios, we are still keeping open the option that, especially in the lower scenarios, that they don't go fully back. But in the middle and high, that the general, what we're hearing, the general track is towards primarily in person. Maybe some lectures will continue to have some options being online. That happened previously. But overall, the activity at the campuses, they're predicting will be fairly high and close to pre-COVID for a variety of things. It's not just obviously the lectures, but it's library and other services, et cetera. And you're right, it's about 16 or 17% of our ridership is post-secondary institutes. So it's a really important segment. What Teresa was showing you as far as our scenarios, this restart program the province has announced is on the most optimistic timeline for vaccination and opening up, and even a little bit ahead of what we'd had. So that's another dimension that we'll watch.
I guess the other comment I have, and it may not be possible, but it might be interesting in relation to information you deliver to the planning committee, segmentalizing return to transit by segments. So showing percentages of pre-COVID ridership, say by students, by commuters, by others, that show how the different segments are returning to transit. And it may help inform Steve's marketing of transit based on where we're not seeing the results that we expect.
Absolutely, and it'll be critical for deploying, as Teresa pointed out, our services, which we have been through CMBC especially, actively managing where do we need those services, especially on high frequency routes, to make sure that we don't have overcrowding.
Yeah, that's true too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Murray. Larry?
Yeah, just to comment on Murray's question, as a teacher at UBC, the message to us has been in fall, we're back to normal, face-to-face, and the more of that, the better. So, that I don't know about the other universities, but that's not my question. In your report, you allude to also tracking auto trends. And I wonder if you could give us just a bit on that, because we do have to start thinking about how many people made that switch back to auto and did it in such a way that they might stay that way, as compared to people who got rides or did just drove together with other people. What do we know about that? Are you worried about that?
First off, I'm worried. Maybe I'll turn it to Teresa about what we know and what we're trying to also know compared to what we have today. Teresa, you want to speak a bit to our sort of monitoring program that we're trying to improve?
Sure. Thank you for the question. We are trying to improve our monitoring for roads. The current information that we have is limited to our TransLink bridges. So we're going to be working with our partners over the summer to see if we can enhance that with some counter data throughout the region. And we also have been fortunate to be working with ICBC and looking at some of their data. Of course, ICBC has a wealth of knowledge that's data that we'd like to have as well, and they have made a large amount of it public, and that will help us understand how many cars are on the road and what we can expect coming forward. So looking at some of those quarterly changes in ownership and registration is helpful for us to have some indication of what we might be looking forward to for change of mode or choices between 2019 and what we can expect for 2021.
The other piece, Tony, Larry, that we'll be using, there are a number of agencies and organizations that are doing surveys around workplace patterns, how people have changed and why. We'll be doing some of our own in that regard to kind of try and better understand what is explaining whatever the volumes are that we're seeing there. Is it because of concern about sharing a trip and there's less car sharing as well as ride sharing? Is it just a pattern change? Those are the things that we'll start to look at.
Yeah, I'm particularly worried that a component of people made the shift. They may have also made an investment for the first time, and it may be a little sticky to get them to move back. And so it'd be good to know what those numbers look like. Is it relevant, or is it just a marginal difference to the future, because it could have long-term implications. So it's something I'm glad you're going to be doing more monitoring on. And perhaps you could, as you report out on ridership moving forward, you could give us a sense of what's happening in terms of auto use and road use. Thanks.
Yeah, that is a key one. Auto ownership is one of those. We actually know there was increased demand for used vehicles and others early last year, but partly as a result of just the economy being slower, actual new car sales were down for 2020.
Oh, good. Well, that's interesting.
For the countering factor. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Larry. Okay. Well, thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Jeff, for that report. We're going to move on to the next agenda item, Jeff, which is an update on 2050.
Great. Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. Larry pointed out that we just completed phase 2 engagement. You'll see some of the results in your the actual report from staff. This is what I would call a preliminary view into that. There's a lot more detail that will follow that we'll get ready in the next month or so that we will release. But I just want to go through a few of the high level things about where we're at and what that bodes for the development of the strategy. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, partly due to COVID, it had been a big gap between our phase 1 engagement, which was our largest engagement ever on what was important to people, the values, et cetera, in part because of COVID. But then we wanted to come out and make sure that we were really clear this time about how we translated what we've heard into the actual goal statements and the key sort of big moves to get a feel, are we on the right track? That's the general terminology that we've been making, so that you as a board, so that the Mayor's Council and our partners, including Province and Metro Vancouver and others, know that are you going to have the social license to do some of the very large things that are necessary over the next 30 years. Our intention is to come out with a full draft strategy in a couple of months later this fall to look towards an adoption by early 2022. Next slide. So I mentioned that this was a pulse check. It was really around sort of 4 areas. We had translated what we'd heard as values into the draft goals around the theme of access for everyone, and you see what those were, as well as we've developed about 20 different strategies. We focused on 3 particular transformative actions that are different than the status quo that we're doing now, to really get a sense from the population and from stakeholders doing other engagement activities where they're at with that. So I'm just going to go through them in turn, what we heard. Next slide. The first was around actually just those 5 goals. We asked people, do you think we're on the right track? To what degree? You can see both from the engagement, which included people coming forward, almost 5,000 of them to complete the survey, watch small videos, etc. We had very strong support that we are generally on the right track. You see in your report some of the comments that people saw about what else they'd like to see or what they felt like is maybe extraneous to this. We also complemented that with a market survey that's more representative of the region as a whole, just from a cross section to make sure that it was both geographically, age, and mode distributed. The good thing is you can see that relatively speaking, they are fairly close. The themes are pretty good. Next slide. So the next key piece was around what we see and what we've seen in COVID. While this is not a COVID recovery plan, the emphasis or acceleration of the emphasis around people first streets, more space for walking, biking, rolling, commercial activities, patios, etc., and reallocation and prioritization of that. That's what we wanted to get some feedback on. You see that both within the engagement survey and the poll that there was actually very strong support for that. We wanted to be clear that there are trade-offs around that, and that's some of the comments that we heard, especially from people that are slightly hesitant about this. How do you do it in a way that does not punish vehicle traffic or goods movement and make sure that transit is there and we're not doing it where it's not efficient to do so. But in general, we saw a lot of strong support. The next question was really around our transit networks. In the past, as you know, we have really had a big emphasis as it relates to rapid transit on SkyTrain. What we showed, could you go to the next action? Thank you. What we showed, if you recall in the engagement, were 2 different networks, one with a greater emphasis on SkyTrain and then fewer lines, and another with a greater emphasis on road-based, so whether that be LRT or BRT, bus rapid transit, running in dedicated lanes still, but on the road space. And how did people feel about them? They were not proposed networks that you choose one or the other, but we wanted to get a sense of where people were, especially with a new idea around a broader, more sort of decentralized network connecting more places, but with a lighter grade of infrastructure and investment that would come with the trade-off of potentially reallocating some road space in many corridors as well. There was a real split, like almost even between the 2 networks, which I think is telling. We're not suggesting that it's going to be one or the other in the tools, I think, in the network that we propose for the fall, but it does show that there's a real openness as well around considering other instruments in order to move quickly. Finally, the last action was around the introduction of automated vehicles. This is probably the most difficult question to ask the public because it doesn't yet exist. And so it's a real stretch of the imagination to understand, how these are going to impact our transportation ecosystem, our equity, our fairness, etc. So we asked 4 questions. You see the result of the first one, just about what roles should the region writ large, TransLink, province, others, play in actually managing the introduction. We saw a real split here. Still more people supported than were opposed. We saw in a lot of the comments that Some people interpret this question about whether or not we should have automated vehicles at all in the region, and that was some of the actual opposition to the question. You know, in our assessment and in our realities, we see a likely high uptick or adoption of automated vehicles, regardless of what we do as a region. So that was our context. The other questions that we asked were about people's openness for measures to incentivize sharing, to disincentivize with fees, empty vehicles traveling around, which is a real fear of automated or robo-taxis, if you will, and also around the congestion that could occur. The actual levels of support were higher for those actions than this particular answer, and they diminished as the more we relied on fees, but there was still strong support. So finally, next slide, please. We will be breaking this down by geography, by mode use, by equity seeking groups and others, and be reporting out to you and the Mayor's Council as we come forward with shaping the strategy. Obviously, there's a key focus on access for everyone. That includes by income level. So that's something we know that the board and the mayors in the province have been very interested in. So that's it. Hopefully in the next month or so, we will have the full report online. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Jeff. Couple of questions, Murray?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. A good report. Just, I heard on the radio yesterday that Surrey is apparently implementing people-friendly streets in 3 neighborhoods, I think was the way it was reported. And I'm wondering, are you aware of the initiative that they're taking in that regard relative to the big moves that, you know, we're attempting to achieve through the T2050 rollout? And is TransLink engaged in those particular pilots so that we can learn from them, better understand how to position the policies that emanate from T2050?
Thank you. Actually, so I'm quite aware, and I know our team is, I'm not sure to the degree that we are monitoring yet with them, but you know, through our Regional Transportation Advisory Committee, there is a lot of coordination that happens. I will say that the Surrey Transportation Plan, the next phase of engagement that came out yesterday, really mirrors in many ways what we're seeing in Transport 2050, and a lot, that is just one of the areas, but also a network that looks very similar to the kinds of networks that we were showing as part of the bookends as well. So more corridors and safety, Vision Zero, all of those kinds of elements that we were posing in our goals are very aligned with what the city of Surrey is looking at. We certainly will engage with them on the pilot and take a look at what the results are of that.
Well, I have to admit that I'm encouraged to hear what you've just said, Surrey being a relatively large city within the region and therefore being a bit of a trendsetter, because that was one of the big moves that I was most anxious about, how people may react to slowing streets in neighborhoods in comparison to their interest in being efficient with their time. So I think it's a good move, and I'm encouraged to hear that Surrey's new transportation plan reflects the aspirations that T2050 is targeting.
Yeah, we haven't done all the crosstabs yet on this work, but we did take a quick look for geographical differences in the responses, and they were not overly apparent. Actually, there was strong support across all of those questions quite consistently, or opposition, if you will, but it was very lined up across the region, regardless if you were in a very urbanized area or a more suburban setting.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marie. Larry?
Yeah, thank you. Again, this is a great report. And by the way, it's worth noting that you also went through it very carefully with the Mayor's Council and the workshops that we as board members attended. And in all of that, I think we were pretty feeling very positive about how it confirms many of the directions that you've been working on, and particularly when you get to numbers like 5,000 people, 6,000 people, and build that on the previous work as well. The one area that worries me, and I think it worried members of the Mayor's Council as well, was that the information on autonomous vehicles was kind of vague and not too helpful. And I think it was probably, you said it, it was because you felt that people just didn't understand what the implications were, what it was all about. And yet in this next period, this 30-year plan, that may be ultimately the single most distorting new introduction into the system that we've seen in years and years and years. And so it seems to me that I know in the next round, the one thing you're going to be doing, which is very good, is that you're going to be focusing not just on majority views, but trying to get to those minority, marginalized voices as well. And I really appreciate that. But I do think you have to re-inquire about automated vehicles. And to do that, I think you're going to have to use some different methods. I was thinking about it a lot after the Mayor's Council workshop, that until we give some people more information, talk about the implications, talk about the choices, they're going to continue to give us probably a vague view, mostly based on just what they heard, at a dinner party or read in the newspaper. So I would urge you to make that a special inquiry moving to the next phase.
Thank you. We'll take that away. We have done a lot of work, as you know, and what we've heard suggestions from the committee, the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee and others, is to spend some time distilling that into mediums that are easier for people to understand, whether those be videos or quick sort of TED Talk type approaches that people can grab the dimensions that are at play. We tried in this survey, but we are doing other things. So I think we can do a better job. So thanks, Larry.
And particularly focused on that automated vehicles issue. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Larry. Okay, thank you, Jeff. We're now going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is an update on the SkyTrain noise study. And Michelle, I think you're going to lead this discussion.
Yes, I'm doing a quick introduction for Jeff Busby. So as you might know, we, in our ongoing quest to reduce SkyTrain noise, we've developed a number of initiatives. One of them is acoustic grinding. We've put in rail dampeners, and we've put in harder steel. But another one is to actually help builders develop buildings that actually are better suited for areas that are close to the railway line. And Jeff can tell you more about it.
Michelle. As the board heard from Director Beasley, we've been doing quite a bit of work with the Stakeholder and Relations Committee on delivering on the findings of the noise study that was conducted on the SkyTrain in 2018. Michelle's team is implementing 5 of those mitigation measures across the network, and you saw some of the results of that earlier this morning. One piece that we wanted to make sure we put in place was guidelines for new developments that would be built near our SkyTrain infrastructure, recognizing that the SkyTrain is a source of noise, that obviously we'll be doing our part to keep that to a minimum, but that we do rely on the buildings, the facades and ventilation systems in the buildings to keep noise at an acceptable level, particularly overnight when sleeping and avoiding sleep disturbance is a priority. So we've worked with a consultant to develop those guidelines in consultation with the municipalities, and we're proposing to roll those guidelines out with a variety of tactics to work with local jurisdictions to see if they can adopt those and incorporate them in their development approval processes. Happy to take any questions on those guidelines or the rest of the mitigation measures.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. Larry?
Thank you. I just want to, Michelle and Jeff, but perhaps more for Michelle, these new measures that you're now exploring and have found to be useful, I really am anxious that we get that message out to the individuals who have had problems. Just as recently as 2 weeks ago, a delegation approached me as just a member of TransLink about the continuing problems. And I think you have some good answers there, but I think maybe people don't know about it, and they won't necessarily be people listening to this public meeting. So I would urge you to do a special outreach, particularly in areas that you've had issues and you continue to have complaints and concerns expressed. For example, that area at the end of False Creek, which you well know about, those people still are having difficulties. You've got some new ways to do things, and I really, really hope that you maybe can work collaboratively with them to try to see how best we can help them.
I think we can make it work, and possibly we can hit two birds with one stone, because we already started an initiative where we are proactively informing people about upcoming engineering works. So maybe we can also use that opportunity to tell them about what we've already done and what we will be doing. So I'll take it on with the communications team to see how we can further improve on what we're doing today.
Thank you. My second point has to do, are we doing any support, incentives, or any kind of financial support for retrofitting windows and those sorts of things in particularly tough areas? Have we ever done anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of, Jeff.
No, we have not.
I mean, if we find ourselves in a position after we've done everything that we still have some people with demonstrated noise problems above health standards, and we know some of these are, it may be worthwhile to think about that as well moving forward. I mean, I really like what we're doing with new development, but that doesn't help a person who's been experiencing it for the last 5 years or 10 years. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Larry. Andy?
Paul, just on that new development, just a couple of questions. If there is implementation, talking about region-wide, does that have to be approved city by city, or can it be done on a regional basis? And my second question, when we're talking about near transit, what is our definition of near transit? Is it an actual distance? Is it blocks? And how? Yeah, I'm looking at somebody that may be moving into an area and unsure. How do we identify a noise zone, for want of a better word?
Yeah. So in terms of implementation, what we've identified and what you see in the guidelines is there is a bit of a gap in the building code around what are the requirements, particularly for ventilation. So we rely on the building facade to mitigate noise. And by we, I mean society. All people who live in their buildings depend on the building facade to mitigate external noise. And particularly that's important for bedrooms. And what we're seeing is that we can likely achieve 75 decibels at the building facade, but comfortable noise levels to avoid sleep disturbance is more like 45 decibels. So there is mitigation that is required in the building itself to get it down to those levels. And what we're seeing is that the issue is really those buildings at and above the track level immediately facing the guideway. That's where we're unable to achieve those lower levels. And so these guidelines, if they were adopted, would call on developers to hire a specialist to first of all validate that there will be those noise levels and develop alternative ventilation or other acoustical measures to make sure that those bedrooms in particular are safe and comfortable places to sleep. TransLink obviously can't require that the individual land use authorities will need to bring those on board. One of our actions is to make sure that the Ministry of Housing, who oversees the BC Building Code, is aware of this set of guidelines. And so actions will need to be taken by partner governments in order to actually implement them.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Andy. Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Michelle, for your report. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the revisions to the board governance manual. And Jennifer, you're going to speak to this.
I will. Thank you, Chair. I'm presenting to you today on recommendations that are brought forward from the Human Resources and Governance Committee for proposed changes to the Articles of TransLink and also the introduction of board competency guidelines. There are some housekeeping changes in the articles, but primarily the focus of the update has been on revising the board competencies. The board competencies are used annually by the screening panel to nominate prospective directors to the Mayor's Council for potential appointment to the TransLink board. The changes that have been brought forward are focused in two areas. One is Some of the changes that are recommended reflect a reordering, reprioritization of some of the competencies that are already in the articles. But primarily we focus on the guidelines in terms of expanding the requirements of the competencies for board members to really provide a broader description of the skills requirements. This is intended to enhance the screening panel's understanding of what the competencies actually mean and what the board intends by them, so that when they are recruiting new board members, they have a broader view and a broader picture of what those competencies mean. The guidelines are also intended to supplement the articles, not replace them. And so this will be a tool to where the board can make adjustments from time to time as needed to make sure that it's clear what competencies and skills may be needed from time to time. The other key aspect of some of the changes that are proposed is to enhance the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the skills requirements for board members. And this will support an EDI focus through the recruitment process and also the appointment of prospective board members by the screening panel. This is demonstrated through an expansion of language in both the articles, but also through the guidelines as well in the descriptions that are there. With that, Chair, what I might do is ask if Marcella Zell, the Chair of the Human Resources and Governance Committee, has anything further that she would like to add for the board before the resolution is put forward.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Jennifer outlined the changes in the proposed resolution very well. I would like to just make a couple of small comments. First of all, I noticed in the AGM, there was a question on Slido from a number of people asking questions about the board and the Mayor's Council reflecting the diversity in the community and why the board didn't do something about it. So I just wanted to emphasize for those who are listening that in fact a screening panel recruits and the proposed board members or recommended board members are actually appointed by the Mayor's Council, not the board. And but they do work within the guidelines of the articles and the guidelines that Jennifer has just spoken about. So our objective on the HR and Governance Committee was to expand them to reflect two things. Number one, the strategy going forward, that we have the required skills and experience to oversee this incredibly complex organization, but at the same time, to make it as open as we can so that the board members, future board members, can in fact reflect through diversity, through inclusion, through equity, the community that we serve. So that was the effort of putting this forward. And I think to the board members, as you all know, we review this every year. And if we find that our changes are still not adequate, we hope that we're certainly going to do for going forward, but we review them every year to ensure that they're updated so that the board member recruitment reflects what this organization needs. So with that, by the way, I would also like to thank Jennifer and the committee for all their work, because they had several meetings between our regular meetings in order to discuss and support this as well. We had another mayor join us, Jonathan Cote, just to ensure that we were reflecting more of the observations of the Mayor's Council. So I just want to thank everybody for all the extra efforts around this endeavor. And so with that, I would move the resolution.
Okay, thank you. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Marcella. So the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions on any of the items on the consent agenda. Lorraine?
I only have one comment, and I just wanted to comment that we see this report regularly about the participation with partner agencies. And I just want to commend the staff for continuing to do that. I think it's such an excellent program that we continue to work well with all of the partners in the region.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. Would you like to move the consent agenda?
I'll move the consent agenda.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so thank you. That's carried unanimously. So that brings us to the last item. If there's any questions or issues the board would like to raise, members of the board would like to raise. Okay, I don't see anything. So that brings almost to a conclusion, but before we conclude, I just wanted to make one comment. This is actually the last public board meeting in which Murray Dunwoodie will be attending as a board member. Murray, it's hard to believe it's been 6 years that you've been on the board, and and obviously your term expires, and so this will be your last public meeting. But on behalf of the board, Murray, I just want to say that we really appreciate your involvement with the board. I think your background as a Chief Administrative Officer and your planning really provided some insights that really helped us as a board member in terms of some of the issues that we were dealing with. And I know that as a chair, I really appreciated your very careful review and analysis of all the board reports. And that was reflected obviously in the questions and the comments that you brought to the table at the board meetings. But most important, Murray, I'm really going to miss those sort of unique and quirky socks that you brought to the board meeting. So I'm not sure if there's another board member who's prepared to take up the challenge and start wearing unique or quirky socks to our board meetings. Murray, seriously, thank you for for all you've done for the board, and we really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. It's an honor for me to have served on a board with such esteemed colleagues. So thank you for your comments, your kindness. And I certainly wish TransLink, this board and TransLink, every success going forward. I know it's in good hands. So thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Murray. So that brings us to the end of our public board meeting. It is now 1:30. So to the board members, I think if we can take a 30-minute break and reconvene for our in-camera board meeting at 2 o'clock. And to the rest of the public, thank you for participating and thank you for engaging with us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next public board meeting. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.